Yes.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejohn Sarowick. Sejohn?
Hi, Dev. I wasn't sure how we were going to start this one off today since it's such a special day.
Yeah, well, we are going to start this one off like normal so that, longtime listeners are not thrown off. But this is a very special day. But it's not a very special episode. It's just like a super special episode, a type of episode that we've never even categorized yet, because something like this has never happened before in the history of the Say Report.
I just like on your sliding scale of adverbs there. It was very, super seems to be below very, really?
I mean, the very special episodes are generally PSAs about education and approaching the world so that you don't wind up dead in a ditch before you're 18 years old. They're like
Have
after
you never
school
listened to any of our very
specials.
special episodes? I don't know what you're...
I mean, that's the energy I'm bringing. I can't speak for what you're providing. But this is a super special episode, title to be determined later on, where we have a guest host. You're used to the Say Report. You're used to coming here listening to your host companions, Devon Decker and Sejohn Sarowick. But this week, we are going to be in the back seat, and driving this car is none other than our Quizmaster General. Big round of applause for Will Fournier, ladies and gentlemen.
Our own Peter Falk. Here he is.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Will.
You might remember me from such months as May. Brendan Fraser.
And so,
thank you very much for having me. It's beautiful to be here. I'm very excited. And thank you for throwing the reins to me straight away to drive this episode. I will need some help. And I would be upset if you guys just sat there quietly while I monologued for the next hour about this. The topic we've discussed today.
Man, you opened that door and we had two choices, and I chose to speak. But man, I could have.
Oh man, it was one of those situations because no, of course it's still going to be an episode of the Say Report. We didn't just invite you in to talk for 90 minutes and then we'd come in and be like, well, wasn't that great? This isn't a TED Talk. That guy Ted, right? I don't know who he is, but the fact that he just hires other people to do his talks for him, genius.
No, it's Talking to Ted. You've been mishearing the title. That's what it is. Those are all produced for one guy. We all just kind of benefit from that man's curiosity.
Oh, is that true?
It's a massive extension of Have you met Ted? That's how every talk starts, and then you lead into Then someone goes, I haven't met Ted, but I'd really like to tell him about microprocessors.
Yeah, and how they're killing one specific country in Africa, and we're not paying enough attention to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It can't be South Africa, though, right? Because Elon Musk coming from South Africa, there's no way he would support microprocessors. Will, what are we here to talk about this? What did you want to do an episode on? Why are you driving the sleigh?
I am driving today, and I mean, as you wish, I will drive today.
That means he loves me.
Yeah.
That means he loves us.
Realistically, I'm saying I love you. But yes, if anyone didn't get that massive drop just then, we are talking about the amazing 1987 film, The Princezz Bride.
I didn't know you could drop something and shoehorn it at the same time, but you did it, man. You succeeded.
Oh, you can drop a shoehorn.
My dad drops a shoehorn every morning. It's how I wake up.
There you go. Who needs an alarm clock when you can drop a shoehorn?
Okay. Wow. You know what I love when you come to the show, because we get derailed as like a rule on the Say Report, but never do we get more derailed than when you show up, specifically because usually you're here with a specific purpose.
Yes.
And we do nothing to help you get there.
Yeah, it's like we don't want to talk about Will's topic.
There's always a destination, and we get there in our own special derailed way.
You know,
the Say Report.
I'm going to save this for next week because, well, we'll talk about that later on in the episode. But yeah, we do. And I don't know, I miss Will. That's one of the reasons why. It's like, I want to talk about what Will is here to talk about. I want to get to that destination. But also, as Will pointed out, we haven't had him on an episode in 5 months.
And as you know, we don't talk to him unless he's recording with us. So we need to get caught up.
I just sit quietly in the corner waiting for the invitation.
Waiting for the call.
Saying nothing. Having thoughts. Good thoughts.
You know,
Do you get kept in Devon's special Faraday cage in the basement too?
Yes, I also put myself in the dryer just in case.
guys, don't blow up my spot.
It's warm in there. I like it.
And no signal gets in, apparently.
No, it's good if you wanted to not talk to anyone. It's the best way. Like if I need to get some work done and I want zero distractions, in the dryer.
See, Devon just told me you just got killed by the Dread Pirate Roberts, so that's where I thought you'd been for the last 5 months.
Good. Look at that. See, we're getting back up. Before I
Spoilers.
I have to apologize to Sejohn and to the other like weird namesake that we're gonna probably be checking in this. I was real upset in Endgame when there was a 5-year time jump, but watching this movie, it's like, oh man, 5-year time jumps happen all the time.
Yeah.
Sejohn just pointed that out to me, but then watching this, I'm like, oh, I love another 5-year time jump, and if it's good enough for the Princezz Bride, it's good enough for me.
Good enough for Marvel. Where do you get all their ideas from?
Well, so now you're presenting ways for us to jump off and really dive into our topic today, and you have not even actually given Will the benefit to actually talk about it.
Yeah, no. So Will, talk about it. We're going to be quiet for this point. Don't give us any amazing moments to like put you in the dryer.
No, I don't think I want you guys to be quiet. I think this is meant to be a discussion. It's a collaborative experience. Yes, this is something that I said that I wanted to talk about because it's just such a good movie. So why wouldn't you want to talk about it? And it has so many. I mean, as you know, not again to go into how the sausage is made, Devon, you said your notes are just quotes because it's such a quotable movie, and it spans across so many different other movies and other pop culture things where it just appears. And people, and some people get that reference, and you get the extra laugh. Where you're like, "Hey, that was the guy from The Thing," and some people sit there blankly while Jason Segel says, "Anybody want a peanut?" In Forgetting Sarah Marsh. Sorry, not in Forgetting Sarah Marsh, but in I Love You, Man.
I Love You, Man. Where it is like, it was so sad because I was sitting there today when Andre the Giant says that line, and I was thinking of that moment with Jason Segel, and I was like, oh, I love Lou Ferrigno in that movie, but imagine if Andre the Giant was still around. You know that would have been the guy, right?
Oh my god, it would have been the perfect movie. Like, it's a pretty good movie. I'd say like an 89 to like a 92 in rating wise. But if Andre the Giant were in it, it'd be 110. It'd be 110.
I honestly think they just went out of their way to try and find somebody bigger than Jason Segel to be in the movie. That was the only requirement.
Yes, that's the challenge.
Oh man. So did we say we're talking about the Princezz Bride?
We have. Will did say that we're here I want to talk about the Princezz Bride.
Good.
And also it's the title of the episode. So like hopefully
at what point as podcasters do we just kind of have to admit like people know what they're getting into, right? Like it's like you clicked play on this. You had to have some idea of what we were doing today.
No one came here for structured discussion.
On the other hand, nobody came here expecting you, so we did throw you something.
So here we are, everybody. It's me without structured discussion.
Yay! Will without structured discussion. Tell your friends.
Bring everybody.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right, though, that this was kind of something that we kind of had to address. And yeah, I'm kicking myself that we didn't like catch it on the 30th. Like when it came around 5 years ago, right? But at the same time, where we were at that point with what we were doing with the show, we didn't really, we would not have been able to do it the justice that I hope we do it today, in talking about this movie. But 35th anniversary seems to be like the big thing you celebrate nowadays, right? Mario got one, so let's give one to the Princezz Bride.
Mario did get one, and isn't that an interesting thing? What will be happening later on in this episode? But I'll just stroke my chin menacingly right now. No, it is. Well, here's the thing, right? The problem with the Princezz Bride and its anniversary, and specifically you two, is the fact that Will is 5 months older than the Princezz Bride, and Sejohn is 16 days younger than the Princezz Bride. So generally, in the 30th anniversary, both of you guys kind of had other stuff going on. And while I would love to have waited for the 40th anniversary, I kind of feel like both of you guys are going to have some stuff going on. So the 35th is that sweet spot for us to celebrate it while we are unfettered by the thoughts of, oh my God, I'm 30 now, and unfettered by the fact of, oh my God, I'm so much closer to the end of the ride.
30, 35. I am moderately existential crisis at the moment.
Yeah, like it's not a midlife crisis because I'd like to hope I live longer than 70. And it's not a quarter life crisis because I don't think I'm making it any further than that.
Oh,
But
see,
like,
I thought we were saying we weren't banking on the 40th anniversary because we didn't know if all three of us would be there.
No, what? No, I'm saying
due
that.
to a falling out or because I'm stuck in the dryer?
I think. Yep. And then 10 years later, they found Will's skeleton in that dryer when they finally came to demolish the old Decker house.
Oddly, it looked like Bart Simpson's skeleton from that one episode in The Simpsons where you definitely see Bart Simpson's skeleton.
Yeah, we have similar haircuts, because it's also just my head. It all blends into one color, so it works.
Oh, we're having a good time. No, it is. When you guys turn 40, like, Sejohn, you're going to be 16 days from turning 40 on the 40th anniversary of The Princezz Bride. Like, I understand that you might want some escapism, but also, like, the small existential crisis that's going on at in your 35th year might be even larger.
I mean, God, I hope not, because I'm
hope...
going through a pretty big existential crisis this year.
I think
Oh
if we
man.
can, if your plans that we discussed off mic all come to fruition, then you'll be sweet when you hit 40. I think it'll be great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Will and I will
right.
be living in your palatial Hollywood estate. We'll have
Yeah,
our
that's the
own
plan.
pool houses,
Ooh, separate pool houses. Wow.
but we'll be next door
I
neighbors.
At 40 years old, I want to live in the same kind of setup that the Seavers had, but I want to be the one living above the garage. Everybody else can have the main house.
I'll own the house, but I only want the small room.
I
So.
just want that apartment above the garage. I always just thought that was the coolest thing.
What a
You can have
great
beads for a
growing
door.
pains reference. That's a show we need to devote more time to. But today, I'm going to be the one to try to keep us on topic. Let's celebrate
Yeah.
35 years of The Princezz Bride. We're dropping this episode on the exact 35th anniversary of its, like, domestic theatrical release in the United States of America. That's
Yeah.
super cool to me.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think one of the reasons that we get so off topic when we're talking about this movie is because it is such a like an ingrained part of my life, like my history with watching movies and stuff. Like, yeah, it came out just before I was born. So that means basically like the VHS was one of the few ones that was around when I was growing up. It was consistently on shelves at like Blockbuster and Major Video and things like that. Like it was everywhere. And then, by the time I was kind of doing my own thing and looking for like my own way in life in like my teens, you started getting things like the 10th and 15th anniversary of this movie and people would kind of talk about it and watch it. Or inevitably, the book would become kind of like required reading at some point in like 6th grade or something, just because it was an easy one to point to because, hey, and we'll read it and then we'll watch the movie was like a go-to for it, right? So like it kind of just it sits kind of perfectly in any kind of lifestyle, right? Like the Princess Bride is such a like pleasing, like universally pleasing film and universally like touching film that it becomes kind of easy to talk about the ways that it fit in 35 years ago as much as it fits in today. Because you joke about me being 40 and not having time to watch this movie or talk about this movie, but that's ridiculous. Like I always have time to talk about this movie. I always have time to sit down and watch this movie and like and just smile and cry and all of the good feelings that you're supposed to get from a movie that you still get from this movie. It's a near perfect film.
And
Wow.
I think one of the things I was flicking this morning through the trivia on IMDb. It's always an interesting little way to find those kind of stories about it. And I have a habit, which is I know is a bad habit, of while watching a movie, I will end up on the IMDb page 6 or 7 times. So I'm like, who's that actor in the background of something that I've definitely seen before? And I will blame ADHD for this, but it's part of the fun where I'm like, I need to do 17 things at once, but I still know what's happening in the movie. This is one of the
Right.
few movies where I will just watch it.
Yeah.
And I don't need to know, and I don't need to check, and I don't need to worry. Even if I'm doing some other stuff, like, I'm also quite bad at having, background noise is wonderful. So I will have a movie on while I am cleaning the house or doing the dishes or whatever it may be. Something will be on.
Right.
And this is always one where I just give up on whatever task I was doing and just sit and watch the movie.
I made that very same mistake today. I put it on this morning just to give myself like a refresher because like I'll be honest, I think I've seen this movie 3 times already this year, between it being on
Yeah.
TV once, being at like a friend's house when it was on, and then today I put it on just thinking, okay, I'll pop it on in the background. I'll do a little bit of work. I'm putting together title cards for the new season and stuff like that of the show, and like as I'm working, I find myself working less and watching the movie more to the point where I eventually just gave up on work and just sat and just with like head in hands just watched this movie. Like I might as well have been sitting on my bed with like my legs kicking behind me. I was 6 years
Yeah.
old again.
And yeah, that's the beauty of something like this, where I mean, I know that's meant to be what we do with film, where you're meant to just get fully immersed in, and you do kind of see it with the kind of Fred Savage of it all, sat there initially going, I don't want to do this, and then, you
Yeah.
know, 5 minutes in going, oh, you can keep reading if you want, that's okay. You can maybe tell me a bit more of the story. And it is that where you kind of start off, and I think trying to explain it to people when I've said to friends, oh, you need to watch The Princess Bride, and they're like, do you mean The Princess Diaries? I'm like, no, I do not mean The Princess Diaries. This is a very different movie that came out in the 80s, and it's kind of a love story, but it's real funny. And it's like a grandfather reading to his son, but you see the action, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, okay, maybe I'll give that a go." But then as soon as they do, they're like, "Oh, thank God, thank you so much for telling me about that movie." It's instantly got into the top 10.
Yeah, I mean like
It
it
just fits.
is I mean it does sell itself as like a fantasy romance, right? Like that is like kind of the bit, right? Is like that's really what's at the heart of this story. But like wrapped in like this genreless like exploration of just like good character work. Like there's just all of this beautiful like fairy tale reference and even just like fantasy writ large, but just also just human stories, right? Like there's just so much going on in this movie that you can never tell exactly where it's going to go from one moment to the next. But and maybe this comes from 35 years of watching this film over and over and over again, but like the trust that you have in this movie to take you there, it doesn't really, it doesn't offend you. Because there are a lot of genreless films. There are a lot of movies out there that try and tread that ground between humor and drama and all that sort of stuff. And not all of them succeed. This movie, pretty much every step of the way, is very confident in what it's doing and succeeds in bringing you along for the ride. I don't think there's a jarring moment in this movie for me. But again, that it could also be colored by 35 years of knowing what's coming, right?
Well,
So,
yeah, you're quoting it before it happens.
Right.
so safe to say, both of you guys grew up with this movie. This is a movie that you watched as children.
I mean, it was definitely around me.
Yes.
I
Yeah,
think that
I feel.
I think it wasn't until I was a teenager that I like focused on I'm gonna sit down and watch The Princess Bride. Probably for like a 10th or 15th anniversary, like I said. Like it probably came up as like a thing that people around me were like excited to kind of and I finally could form my own opinion and I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And fell in love. But like I do know before that there was definitely nights where this movie was on it, like when I was being babysat by like a cousin or a neighbor or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel that I always thought that my parents had shown it to me at some point, and it was one of my mum's, like, my mum had said, "Oh, this is a good movie, you should watch it." And then when I was back in the UK at some point, I'd said to my mum, "Oh, I watched The Princess Bride." She's like, "Oh, I don't think I've seen The Princess Bride." So then I was like, "Well, now I don't know how it came into my life because it must have just been somewhere that I'd seen it either at a friend or whatever." But I was like so convinced that my parents had told me about it and said it was a movie they'd watched and I should watch it, and it was a thing.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, the fact that my mum was now like, "Oh, I don't think I've seen that. Oh, that was really funny. Thanks for introducing me to it." I was like, well, now I'm confused. This film was just always there.
Well, you have the unique experience of everyone here today of having an older sibling. Could it have come from Liz? Is it something that maybe she would have been into, or?
I mean, potentially, but I don't know. Maybe we watched it when I went to stay with her at uni one day, or like it could have been on then in the background. She maybe had friends she lived with who had it on. It could have come from anywhere. That's why I mean, just kind of organically arrived in my life, and now it's staying.
I actually I do remember we used to have these after school like events where you could sign up to like stay after school and watch a movie. Like it was, social bonding or whatever they do it for younger kids or I don't know if they still do this stuff or what. And I remember like choice of movies to watch one day was like Goofy Movie, Princess Bride, Matilda. Like it was like you could pick one of those rooms to be in and
Mm.
Princess Bride was definitely on that list. So I wonder if it's things like that too, right? Because then inevitably the day after everybody is quoting every movie that they saw. And so like it just becomes that thing. Like it becomes innocuous. Like I said before, like it's so ingrained in every kind of like little bit of my life that like, you know, I can talk about where I was when I was 30, but I can also tell you that like I was probably also quoting this movie, right? Like you killed my
Yeah, I feel
father,
like,
prepared to
and
die is something I probably say on like a weekly
yes,
basis, just kind of out of habit now.
and I feel like that's the thing. You do quote it without realizing that you're quoting it. And I still know this one like marriage has been
Yep.
something I've said a lot recently, and everyone's like, "What's that from?" And you go, "It's just a quote I know because I've always known that quote." And whether I saw that theme in, I definitely remember watching it on an airplane at one point because it was one of those movies which was like in the back catalog of airplanes,
Right,
so it
right.
was available, and it just kind of was everywhere. But Devin, did you have a different like route into it? Because you sound like you asked us.
Yeah,
We'd always known it. It sounds like you weren't always
yeah,
there with it.
that's exactly where it was coming from. Because what we did, it was eighth grade, so it was the year 2000, because it was the tail end of eighth grade. The eighth grade unit, what we had really learned that year was about the Holocaust and World War II. So what we did, like near the end of the year, as it was supposed to be like a reward for us, a celebration, was watch Schindler's List.
Oh,
Now,
oh,
yeah, and
What a
so
reward!
yeah, right. But the whole team, right? Because they broke us up into teams. We were the Jade team at the time. Got together in the auditorium to watch Schindler's List. Now, Schindler's List, that's like a 4-hour movie, but it's a 6-hour school day, right? So after Schindler's List had finished, they're like, well, we're not going to try to make them do anything else. So the question was, well, why don't we put something else on? So the follow up for me to Schindler's List was The Princezz Bride.
What a double feature.
what a weird. I mean, see, then that becomes a weird experience in and of itself because like context is key. Like we talk about this all the time, right? Like
Yeah.
the way that you frame a movie is going to inevitably shape it, especially the first time you watch it.
Yeah, no,
Wow.
yeah. So that's the, and I've told before on like the American Pie episodes that like the time we watched Roots and someone switched out the tape of Roots for American Pie, it is the same exact set piece. Just switch in Schindler's List, and then after Schindler's List, we all went to the bathroom and came back, and they're like, "We're gonna watch The Princess Bride." Now we had like 30 minutes left in the school day, so we're gonna watch The Princess Bride is more, we're going to put The Princess Bride on until it's time for you to go home. And they announced The Princess Bride of it and all the other guys like that were in my classes were like, "Oh, The Princess Bride." Like they were all down on it because that was the cool thing to do, right? Like we were 12 and 13 years old. That's how
Yeah,
we
yeah.
reacted to things. And I'm sitting
Yeah,
there like, how do all these people know about this movie that like I have never heard of? And the fact that I've never heard, I mean, like the Rob Reiner that I grew up with in this house was A Few Good Men. So like I grew up with a Rob
yeah.
Reiner movie, guys, but it was one that was like way too advanced for me in 1992 when it came out, and I was just a 6-year-old Devin Decker. But I watched that movie, loved that movie, and this movie starts, and I have loved it from the first moment. The fact that it starts with that old ColecoVision baseball game.
Oh, the most amazing bit of
It's
baseball.
what a fucking wild swing to open The Princess Bride with a full-on down the barrel shot of a ColecoVision game that goes on for like a minute before it pulls back to reveal anybody even playing it. Like there was a second where I was like, did I put the wrong thing on? I remembered it starting that way. I just didn't remember it happening for so
It
long.
goes on for so long. Did I put on the Wizard? The Wizard is Nintendo exclusive. It might be Commodore 64, but it's one of those two. I want to make sure that that's it. But so like that happens, and I'm like, this is interesting. And then that whole framing device, I was sold. Like the idea of like,
Yeah,
this is the grandfather's reading this book, and the kid like he doesn't like certain things, so already the grandfather's going to become this like unreliable narrator as he tries to edit the book to keep his grandson interested in it. I was sold. And I sat and I watched this movie like open mouth. I couldn't tell you a thing about Schindler's List. Like, that's just the truest thing. The 20 minutes that I watched of The Princezz Bride, because we stopped right at the sword fight starting between Inigo and Wesley.
Oh.
And I'm just like, he's like, the last lines I heard were, "You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you. You seem a decent fellow. I hate to die." Final bell rings. Movie is stopped. And I'm like, I need fucking more. I need to know what happens. And I got home that day and I'm like, we got to go to the video store. I need to see The Princezz Bride. And my mom's like, "Oh, I think I've seen that movie." Same exact thing as Will, where like my mom and father both acted like they were familiar with it, but didn't know it. We ended up having to go to the library to rent a copy of it, and I watched it that night, and I'm just like, what a great friggin' movie. But the stigma that it was connected to in my mind, as Sejohn said, it's all about context, was like, people do not like this movie. That is the takeaway I had from that experience, following up Schindler's List with it, and every other like cool guy in my class being like, "Ugh, The Princezz Bride," but it's like this freaking amazing movie, and I'm like, well, I guess I just keep this one to myself. It can just be like a movie that I love for me, and I don't need to share it with anybody. And then, like, luckily, 2005 comes along. I'm in college, and I find a bunch of people who love The Princezz Bride.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that this movie had going that what we should also mention around us in Rhode Island was Andre the Giant. I mean, that was also a huge part of it. Was I had a lot of friends around me that were wrestling fans, and Andre the Giant has like a tenuous relationship with like Providence that people love to play up, because that's what you do, right? Is like, yeah, they shat in the bathroom once at the subway down the street, so obviously this is a hollow ground to them.
And then he wrote with the shit "obey" on the wall, and a million stickers were launched.
Yeah, so that was the other big reason that I think that it kind of, at least in my social circles, the few like guy friends that I paid any credence to what they cared about, Princezz Bride had this somewhat of a pass, because on top of everything, like you had Andre the Giant, one of the like greatest, like historically one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Like, he wasn't wrestling by the time I would have been watching wrestling or this movie, but like that automatically kind of put it in some safe zone with my friends. So I never really quite got this. I definitely got this with other stuff. Like, I also really liked like Legend from this time period, right? And that was definitely not one.
The original Tangerine Dream score, right? That freaking remake one is BS.
Yeah. Or what's the unfinished one there? The Last Unicorn, doesn't that have some like unfinished bits to it?
It's finished, but it's not what he wanted it to be.
That's
like,
what it is.
Yeah.
Even that one was like around, right, and stuff. And those I definitely got shit for. But I love those movies too. So I can like very specifically recall that I was catching shit for certain movies. It's not like that didn't happen in my friend groups, but this one was not one of them.
Yeah, it's not that I was catching shit. It's just that, like, it seemed like a thing that wasn't cool. And I was used to liking things that weren't cool. And I was fine celebrating them on my own time. Like, it wasn't... Also, like, anime got really big that same year. And I didn't want to have conversations about anime. Like, those people who would sit and watch Goku charge up his power attack for 10 days in a row on Toonami... I wasn't interested in that conversation.
You're missing the subtlety, Devon. The individual episodes represent Sisyphean and feet. All right, we're not doing this here.
But I think that's what you find. And you're saying about like kind of, it is a subculture, but it isn't, because you are just in this world of The Princezz Bride.
Right.
And you kind of get to the point where someone will make a quote or say something, and there'll be a couple of faces that look blankly at you, and then one person goes, huh? Awesome. And you go, that's the guy. Now, there you go. We have this now instant connection because that guy's recognized the one random line I've picked from the middle of this movie in a perfect way. And now suddenly we can, we're not going to say we're going to be best friends, but it's almost that Step Brothers moment of, oh my God, did we just become best friends? Where you are, you're in that moment where you suddenly go, cool. And it doesn't need to be any more than, you saying something like inconceivable. and one person turns around and you're like, you get it. Awesome. Thank you.
Oh man, like yeah, it has like it creates like a universal language, right?
Yeah.
And that is none more obvious than when meme culture took off. That like some of the earliest stuff is shots from this movie with like various meme quotes around it, right? Like especially Mandy Patinkin, like all over the place with that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean it not only is it enjoyable to quote and for people to like reference and stuff like that, but also like it really does shape for me like kind of what I want and expect from stories, from you know not just love stories but definitely hugely influenced my view on love stories, and specifically adventure style love stories. But then on top of that, like you know, I love the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern-esque nature of Finnick and Inigo Montoya, right? Like they're the ways in which they like rhyme with each other and joke with each other, and they're like yeah, it becomes kind of my favorite kind of go-to character for a long time when I'm growing up in movies. Is I love these like these goofy side characters, especially like if they start off as kind of the quote unquote bad guys, but then like realize the error of their ways and then they come around and stuff. I literally actually no, well, we will talk about this in a later episode because today I really want to talk about Princezz Bride. But I just watched DC superhero pets or whatever the Super Pets movie is that they just did, and
Oh,
that
your
that
Rock and Kevin Hart thing.
that trope shows up in it, right? There's a couple of characters that are baddies, but then eventually kind of realize the error of their ways and join the good guys, and like it pervades to this day, right? That all I could think as I was then watching The Princess Bride today was, oh man, this is just like in a movie last night.
I love it. That's one of my favorite tropes. When Toru in Jackie Chan Adventures went from working with the Dark Hand to being on the J Team, I was so happy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's that redemption story, and what is really cool about it is that it shows these two as being these redemptive characters that you understand that in this world redemption can exist, right? Like people can be complicated and gray and all of this sort of stuff, but this world also still makes room for straight up evil people, and it makes them all the more evil because of the fact that they are clearly in a world where the opportunity is present for them to not be, and they're still choosing to be. So like the bad people in this movie are really bad, and the good people in this movie are really good. But there's also these characters that exist in this in between, you know, and it's a sliding scale because you also get the same thing with the with the what the Billy Crystal character in the woods. What's his
Miracle
name?
Max.
Miracle Max, right? Where like Max is Max is also in this really weird realm, a little bit more on the good side for sure, but he's also definitely being kind of a prick to them when they first show up, right? There's this guy dying on his table and he's not choosing to save him until he realizes it can benefit him, right? And so like there's this beautiful kind of spread of evil to good in this story that is at the end of the day still just a good versus evil story. It really did shape a lot of my expectations for storytelling for the rest of my life and still does.
Well, yeah, it plays beautifully in that kind of gray area you're saying there, where it's like you don't always have to do the right thing to be good,
Mhm.
and you can end up being seen as the bad guy, as the Dread Pirate Roberts, and this whole story comes out, but actually he's doing it all for the right reasons. And you go,
Yeah.
there's along the way you will come up against people who don't agree with what you're doing, but actually if you do, like, the whole, there's going to be the prince, and everyone's like, oh, it's the charming prince who's going to marry this woman, that's going to be lovely. And then you go, no, he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
But actually, there's the other bad guy along the way who's not really the bad guy. He's just misled and confused, and he actually just wants to kill the guy who killed his father.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah,
isn't
that is
evil
actually
part of
something. Yeah, and that's actually something I didn't even really pick up on until I was watching this time. Is I did not realize how deep kind of the turn is buried on the prince, like turning out to just be kind of the douche of the whole thing. There's a
yeah.
good long while where he is very very. He seems very very good as a prince and as a tracker and all of that, and then you realize that he was the one that hired the assassins and all of this stuff, and the turn is something else, like long before Frozen, right? Like it's
Way
So true. But it works. All right. And
Yeah.
so the other thing, right? This episode very easily could have been an episode because it's based on a book. And then it also gets a weird remake in pandemic times with that Quibi version of The Princess Bride. But I wanted to focus on the 35th anniversary when that's when Will brought it to us. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm like, then you're going to be driving the sleigh on this one, buddy, because I know I would have turned it into an episode. But I do need to ask, has anyone here read the book? Or is this just the movie for them?
So short answer, no, right? Like I have not read the book, but it's one of those books that is in my life. Like somebody at some point bought it for me, and I have followed a lot of what was the writer's name? Goldman. He passed
William
away
Goldman,
a few years ago.
We
I followed
celebrated
a lot
an
of
episode
what.
from him.
Yeah. I think the bigger thing about the Princess Bride outside of the movie for me that is more kind of it's not like pressing or important to me to read the book. But what is cool and the things that I do like to keep up on is the like kind of weird stuff around like the meta of the Princess Bride, acting like it was a book that he then edited and got like into a bunch of like legal shit, and he wanted to write like a sequel but would get like letters from lawyers about not being allowed to, and none of this is like true, right? Like it's all this weird like kayfabe that he like invents around like this story and people are asking him, you know, are they ever going to make a sequel? And he's like, well, I'm really working on it, but I don't know if I've got the rights to this, and this. But if you go to this website, you can find this chapter, and then people like go to that website, and then that website is now this like inscrutable legalese about how he's in trouble with the like original estate and cannot actually publish this stuff. Like there's this really weird like almost ARG around everything outside of the movie of The Princess Bride that he kept up like for the rest of his life. It's amazing how much he kept the bit going. Andy Kaufman would have been proud.
I mean, yeah, I'm in a similar space. I've not read the book, and I feel like it's sometimes hard if you get those people who are so like, oh, the book's way better than the film. And I feel in this, I was so introduced to the film and heavily into it that if I read the book now, all I will do is see the movie in my head.
Yeah.
And you kind of like would take something like Harry Potter, for example. I read them so many times as a child growing up.
Did you read the adult cover or the child cover? I need to know. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Initially, I always read the child cover.
Okay. Are they
I was proud of my reading.
But
I have the original one where Dumbledore's got the short beard and brown hair, despite being described completely differently in the book. The first edition that came out of Sorcerer's Stone for you guys, Philosopher's Stone for everybody else, has a different Dumbledore on the back cover.
What a weird flex that was. I love you, Will.
I had a Mad Magazine fake cover for Harry Potter and the like Sorcerer's Throne or something, and it was like a big toilet on the front of it with like Dumbledore sitting on the toilet. And I am so proud of this. I tactfully cut it out of Mad Magazine as it instructed you to do, put it around the first edition copy of it that we had in the house, and put it on my mother's shelf where she had it displayed proudly, and she did not notice for literal years. One day, like years later, she was like, what is this? And I go like walking in and I'm like, what's the matter? And she's like, what is this book? And I was like, oh no. And I had to show her that it was Harry Potter. I had just put a fake cover around it. That's my story about Harry Potter. But
I think with the movies threw me on that one because they weren't what I'd imagined.
Right.
And that's true for everybody who reads books and reads whatever. When they bring it out and you suddenly go, this isn't how that's meant to happen. And then you go, but with this one, I think it would be almost the opposite for me because I know the movie so well. If I read the book, I'd be like, this book's different. Why would they do this? When
well, and
the
like
movie that was different.
So, to my understanding, the book is written with like missing pieces and all that, right? Like it is supposed to just be the quote unquote the good parts, right? Like that's the joke.
It is the good parts version. It is. It
just doesn't have the grandfather reading it, right?
The grandfather reading it is William Goldman himself, because he essentially takes on this role of the narrator who's telling you the story, and he interjects halfway through it things. Like there's 4 different types of brackets so that you can understand when it's an editor who's talking, when it's Goldman who's talking. and it's great. It's like this wonderful like book, but it's one of those other things. In high school, there was a group of guys who hung out near the radio station, and they're like, "You have to read The Princess Bride." And of course, I got a copy of it to try to read it because I remembered the movie. I remembered enjoying the movie, and I couldn't get into it. But the big hurdle to getting into it was this group of fellas thought that there did exist a 1,300-page version of The Princess Bride. They completely missed the joke.
Did they do the too cool for school thing and like talk about reading the full version?
No, because there is no full. They did not do that.
Oh my god, I get like cringe thoughts just thinking about it. Like those lies you find yourself in like elementary school.
I've done that. I read that. That was cool.
Yeah, no, it was one of those situations where. So I'm like, so the whole first chapter of it is William Goldman explaining that 1,300-page book and how like so much of it is going to be cut out of it, and I'm just like, this is too much for me because like. All I could hear was them talking about and their conjecture about the parts that might have been cut from The Princess Bride. And I tell you, they were so sincere. The Great Pumpkin could have shown up at any moment. It was,
man.
It was, and then when my appendix burst in 2004, someone gave me a copy of the Princess Bride book to read. They gave me.
I thought you meant out of anger.
No. It burst. I don't know why it burst. It had been. I don't know. We'll talk about my appendix some other time in some appendix to another episode. But someone came to visit me in the hospital and they gave me two books. They gave me The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien and The Princess Bride. And now getting those two books together. And having nothing better to do, sitting in a hospital for 5 days recovering, I realized what Goldman was satirizing. And what he was satirizing was J.R.R. Tolkien and all of the descriptive nature and words and usage of like language that he would shove into these parts of the book that honestly do not matter. The one that I always leap to mind is...
No. It definitely matters because what kind of ammunition are guys going to have in 35 years on the fucking internet when they start to argue about the color of elves in Middle Earth?
Rings of Power comes along. Yeah, he knew. He knew. No, it's because in the Princess Bride, there is where Buttercup is packing for a trip, and he talks to people like the original book literally goes on for 100 pages as she takes out every piece of her wardrobe and assesses whether or not it would be good for the journey and describes in lavish detail the color, the feel, the fabrics that were used. I decided to cut all of that. Right?
Yeah.
So like,
well, I mean, and you can point to Tolkien for sure as like being like a key example that everybody understands that. But the truth is that the fantasy genre to this day is still rife with that shit. Like guys that will write 13 books about the same event, but every book is from a different character's point of view or something to that effect, right? Like it's just the number of times a fantasy writer will take a two book story and turn it into a 13 book saga, right? Is like kind of a problem in the genre. For a lot of people, it's part of the reason why a lot of people cannot get into fantasy is because it feels like you have to dedicate yourself to the next 10 years of reading books, and you may end up hating that series by the end, because that's the other thing, is that a lot of these books, a lot of these writers have been writing for so long that they've now found themselves writing for audiences that don't necessarily agree with a lot of the shit that they wrote themselves into in those first couple of books 20 years ago. Like, Tolkien is definitely an easy target and definitely the right target for this sort of shit, but is by far not the only person that was responsible for this kind of nonsense.
Right. But then, because of that nature of the book, when William Goldman is the person who adapts his novel to be a movie, he gets to have that same sort of fun taking the book and then getting to do the same hack job to the good parts edition of the book.
Yeah.
and it's great. And then the framing device of the grandfather really works because it exists, and like my father would read this book to me and I loved it, and then I realized when I finally got a copy of it that my father wasn't a literate asshole who was just making up a story with a book in his lap.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. And you talk about we can read the book and then we can watch the movie. Like, what a wonderful movie to do that with if you're in any type of like film and literature class, because it's the same guy who writes both of them.
Yeah,
And
there is definitely a benefit there to the same voice, right? It feels like the movie does the book justice, even though I've never read the book.
Yeah,
Like, I will remind everybody that I said that. But you get that feeling, and a lot of that cachet comes from the fact that you have the same guy doing both, for sure.
Yeah. And he was a screenwriter. Like William Goldman, the reason why we celebrated him when he passed away, right around the same time as Stan Lee, the Lee Goldman Report, it's out there. I think it's like our 16th episode of the show. It is the reason why that he was able to do what he did in this book was because he was writing screenplays. Like he had done Marathon Man as a book, and then he wrote a screenplay, and he loved working on screenplays. So then he comes back to do a book with The Princezz Bride, and then when it's like obviously like, well, we want to make this a movie, William, and you're gonna write it. Like, it's great, but of course, like little throwaway lines, like the pit of despair in the novel being 5 layers deep that Fezzik and Inigo have to go through together, and it really bonds them, going through 5 layers of just torture and like rabid animals and all of that. Like that, it's as long as I just described it to you guys in the book. It's 1 paragraph.
Nice.
And so like, because then he's like, and then he goes into great detail of everything they do. But the most important thing is that they get through the pit of despair and they find Wesley. Let's continue on. So like, then we don't need to talk about the 5 layers. They just need to find Wesley. It's wonderful. And I won't go there. But the last thing I'll say about the book, and then we'll get back to the movie. But I was curious if it was one of those movies that you had grown up with that inspired you to seek out the book. Because then the experience of doing that is always interesting to me. I don't know. Maybe that's just how I do it. But the thing you talked about, the kayfabe of it all, and the... Is it someone okay? Did someone have a stomach ache?
It's the dog.
He's
run away.
That's fine.
Don't mind him.
Well, you said fun noises. I'm like, that's not a fun noise. That sounds like Will's in the pit of despair.
That's the dog thinking somebody came to the door, but definitely no one came to the door. He just felt like, he heard something that I couldn't hear with his amazing hearing and decided to run away.
He heard Devon talking about reading the book, and he's just pissed because it's the one thing he'll never get to do. He can watch the movie all he wants, but he's a dog, Devon. He can't read.
I'm sorry that the dog can't read. The dog can learn how to read. If you,
I'll read the book.
I'm not getting the dog people mad at me because of a joke about dogs should learn how to read. They should take the time. Because also, I think that's how Planet of the Apes started, right?
Yes, exactly. They wanted to teach apes to read, and then suddenly they were taking over the world.
Oh, no, I thought all the cats and dogs died because they did the research, and they decided not to get inoculated against the plague that killed them, leaving apes as our only pets. Planet of the Apes is a weird movie. Anywho, that whole kayfabe of it, in the novel, when they reunite at the bottom of the hill, there's this huge, he takes this whole thing about there's no reunited scene in the book. The original book by S. Morgan Stern does not have them celebrate or kiss at all. So I decided, since I'm editing this book, I'd like to write that scene. And when I presented it, the lawyers were like, no, you're not adding this to this book. How fucking dare you? Because it's also sort of like a satire of the Bible, and how whoever wrote the Bible kind of focused on the parts that they wanted to make negative. Princezz Bride is a brilliant book, and I do love it. But then he says at the bottom, but if you do send a self-addressed stamped envelope to this address, we will send you a copy of the reunion scene so that you can finally see how I always envisioned it in my mind.
To which people actually wrote to that address.
Which I've written to it twice. Because the first time I read the book, I wrote to it. And then the second time I read the book, I'm like, oh, it's not by Lana Del Rey anymore. Like, Lana Del Rey Books does not exist. It is, I don't know what the name of it is. I don't think it's
Lana Del Rey.
I think it's just Del Rey Books.
Yeah,
but
no, it's fine.
But
I don't think she can take credit for the book.
But I knew... but I knew that whatever company is listed in the in the text of the novel no longer exists, but it's the same text between them. So like 2013, I think I did this. I sent another self-addressed stamped envelope, and then I got back like they had to forward it and all of that, but they still send out the same letter to you that is all about how the lawyers wouldn't let me send this to you. And it's brilliant. It's all brilliant. Yeah. And then the other thing, like you talk about the sequel, I will forever respect William Goldman because he writes the first chapter of the sequel, Buttercup's Baby. And spoilers for a book you're probably never going to read. The first chapter is called Fezzik Dies. So in the first chapter of the book, he kills beloved character Fezzik, and you're just like, oh my God. And it's like a really beautiful like deconstruction of how sequels work, where like obviously the most beloved character is the one we're gonna fridge so that you understand there are stakes again. It's the whole thing is excellent. And the fact that he kept it going until he passed away, I will forever respect.
Yeah, and it takes swings, like you're saying, at everything. It takes swings at the genre. It takes swings at the world of publishing, at the world of screenwriting. Like there's so many there's so many targets, and everybody. And every hit is a fair hit, right? Like it never feels like it's mean in any regard, which I think is also something that's really wild for such a. I mean, it is a spoof, right? Like at the end of the day, it really is kind of it's satire is the right word, but nowadays it would definitely fit in the spoof movie genre. And like the ways in which it's able to do that and still love, like, is a very rare breed. Like usually these movies get so mean that they become kind of cringy and unwatchable. But no, it's so sincere, and it loves all of this stuff so much that when it takes these swings, when it punches at this stuff, it means it. But it hits so good.
I mean, it's a spoof that does it better than everything else in the genre at the time, right? Can you name any other fantasy? Well, you did like Legend, but like The Princezz Bride is the gold standard fantasy movie of the 80s, right? I don't think anybody would disagree with that statement.
I mean, I think there are definitely people out there that might like other movies more than this one, but they'd be hard pressed to argue that this was not the most universally like beloved, right? Like if a group of people get together to talk about like the best movie, this definitely floats to the top a lot faster than most, for sure.
I also feel like it's that one that you don't need to watch it 2 times to know why it's good, or you don't need to just give it a second go, or just get through those, like you say, like get through the first 4 episodes and then you'll love this show. It's just instantly like something like Napoleon Dynamite's a good example. It became a cult classic through a group of people who loved it and gave it that second hit and go. But the first time you watch Napoleon Dynamite, you're like, this is kind of weird. It's not really about anything. And I don't know what happened. But then you watch it and you go, okay, I start to see why there's moments of this film that work, and then the quotes start to flow, and you go, okay, now I get it. Whereas with The Princezz Bride, you watch it and you go, I'm going to watch this again because I want to, not because I have to understand why it's a good movie. It's going to be that one that you will happily go back to when you don't have anything to do for an afternoon. You're like, should we just put The Princezz Bride on? Because it's going to be fine, and everyone's going to have a good time.
No, it's definitely got it's
well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely parts, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I do want to make sure that it is insanely watchable, right? Like this movie is, if nothing else, watchable, and it is so much more than that. But that's what I mean is I don't think anybody out there could argue that at the end of the day, this is a movie they can put on to please everybody at the party versus 1 or 2 people might want to watch something else instead, but they'll definitely be okay with Princezz Bride. I think Willow is another one that's in this genre that doesn't land as well. Like I know that there are people that struggle watching that movie now if it's not something they grew up with, right? And I'm excited to see what they do with that with the story with the series that's coming out, because I do love Willow, but I also have tried to show it to friends and it not landed so well. Whereas Princezz Bride is one that I can pretty much guarantee that if I need something to put on with a group of people, this is one that I can put on that everybody's going to be okay with. But yeah, there's definitely some stuff in 2022 that hits a little hard on the ear, shall we say? I mean, not least of which is Mandy Patinkin running around the whole time with his weird Spanish accent on, or what his version of a Spanish accent is.
He's not Spanish, right? That's a question I asked too late into my viewing.
I have always been under the impression that he's supposed to, but there's a lot of stuff that I caught this time that I never really thought about the first time around. Like for instance, when they're in the swamp, there's that moment where West gets attacked by the ROUS, right? And he says, I don't think they exist at all. And then suddenly one jumps him, right? And it's this funny bit, joke lands, and it's great. I had always kind of been under the impression that he didn't believe in them until that moment, not realizing that like two beats earlier, he sees them but doesn't want to freak her out. So he's actually saying that in an attempt to kind of keep her calm and walk her away from them. I don't know why I never picked up on that before watching it this time around.
Yeah, he
Like I
clearly
was like,
saw the ROUS. Why the ruse, Wesley? Why the ruse?
so little beats like that, I will admit, I have definitely been missing all along. So maybe you could convince me that maybe the joke is supposed to be that he's not actually a Spaniard.
No, I
In
meant
that
the
case,
actor.
it
I meant
almost
Mandy
kind of
Patinkin, the
works.
actor, is not Spanish, right?
No.
No,
Inigo
I don't
Montoya
believe
is
so.
definitely written to be a Spaniard.
Okay,
The- the-
yes, yes.
and by
But
all,
Patinkin was known to give interviews in worse English during the time the movie was coming out. He was doing interviews in the Spanish accent and being like more broken English
Well,
than
I
the
mean, and
character,
he
just
has
because he
a
wanted to.
yes, he's got a weird history as like an actor. I respect the hell out of Mandy Patinkin. The guy has worked longer than most actors in this world and successfully, I mean, worked. And like, but
Yeah.
he had issues with people when he was working on Homecoming. That one of the first Sundance movies I ever saw, he was a huge part of. Before you know it, I still have the ticket up on the wall in front of me. And he he plays a character in that movie where he plays a male patriarch figure in a family full of females, and they all struggle with their relationship with him. And you get the impression from the way the director talked about working with him that some of the stuff that they dealt with in that movie was not as it wasn't as much acting as you think on screen, shall we say. Nothing torrid or anything like that, but he's definitely known as being kind of an odd duck off screen, right? And I'm sure somebody's going to point out some hard shit about him now because that seems to happen every time I talk about one of these guys. And if that's the case, then that's the case, you know. But for what I know as of sitting right here at the time of this recording, he's not an easy dude to work with and has some weird quirks. And so like him doing that kind of shit off screen does not surprise me. But
Yeah.
that's not even really the biggest sin that this movie commits. I really do think at the end of the day, Miracle Max is Billy Crystal has got to answer for some of his shit someday. I mean, like between between him putting on these like Jewish caricatures that he puts on in a bunch of these movies, that time he was like played blackface to pretend to be Sammy Davis Jr. for the Oscars, and we all kind of gave him a pass, which was fucking weird because it was like 2015, I think, or some shit like that. Like. I don't know. I don't understand why Billy Crystal has been able to get away with some of the shit he's been able to get away with, just because he always seems to be kind of like everybody's friend in the room. But why? Why has nobody questioned him?
Well, I mean, you even have like comments of like Rob Reiner had to leave the set during the filming Miracle Max scene because he was laughing too loud.
Yeah, well,
And you've got Patinkin saying the only injury he sustained was trying to not laugh during that scene.
yeah. I
And
mean, I
it was seen as that obviously at the time this amazing piece, and it is an incredibly funny scene. And the lines, I think the character work is maybe overplayed because the lines are so good on their own. You don't need
yeah,
to do that big thing, like the mutton lettuce tomato sandwich, and I say MLT. It's
the
so
mutton's real
well
thin.
done. You can do it in whatever accent you want, and it didn't
yeah.
need to be the Billy Crystal of it all.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely some weird ghosting going on in that character that is super problematic, and people have called that out before. I'm not the first person, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm somehow noticing something that other that other people seem to be missing. Like it is definitely something that gets thrown at this movie a lot. Is like it's the blue part of this film for those of us with some deep Say report lore in them. But this idea being that like he puts on this caricature that immediately kind of just like you start white knuckling in your chair like, oh no, is this going to go too far? And like, I don't know, I'm not in a position to say whether or not it does, but it definitely gets a little too close for my comfort, I will say, in a lot of weird places. But then the scene is only 3 minutes of this movie,
It is
so
the quickest scene. It is the thing that they use. I don't know if you guys remember this. I don't even know if they had this over in the UK, Will. But when VHS became the $5 bin, do you remember when like it became hyper affordable to buy VHSs Was that
Yeah,
the thing
absolutely.
that
There
it
was
was?
definitely a point where they cleared
yeah.
the shelves and chucked them in the corner. And like they'd still be in Blockbuster as like, hey, you can still get this on VHS, but there was way more of the DVD starting to roll in as like this is
Yeah,
going to be the
or
one you actually want to buy.
So
yeah,
it's
eventually Blockbuster would have those crates in the middle of the aisles that were just
just
full of
take
like
them.
buy these because we need to get them out of our store type situations.
What I'm talking of specifically is right before the rise of DVD. DVDs
Yeah.
clearly existed because Space Jam is like the first DVD. Like that's one of those things that like is trivia. But it was, I want to say 2000, it might have been 2000, maybe 2001, where the like if you went to a store, you could get VHS really cheap, but DVD was not the preferred like format yet. Like it was just, oh my god, it's become so affordable to create these VHSs that we're just kind of dumping them out there. It was this weird thing. What I recall in my mind is hundreds of VHS with like a maroon border around the cover art.
Hmm.
And the movie that I bought that jumps to mind is Revenge of the Nerds. And before Revenge of the Nerds, there was like a promo to go out and buy VHSs. Like they're hyper affordable now. Own the movies. And it was this grand supercut of all these like classic 70s and 80s movies that like probably the parents want to show to their kids. And it ended with "Have fun storming the castle," and
Right.
and it's like that's how they sold the. There was nothing else from the Princess Bride in this, and even to me, who had only seen it one time, I'm like, I know this is from something that I've seen, but I don't know what. But like the scene itself, for all of the lore and aggrandizing around it, is so quick. And
Yeah.
this movie clips anyway. Like this movie, things just happen. There's no setup. It's like you're in the scene, figure it out. Good
Yeah,
luck.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, but that's kind of the bit, right? Is that there's so much universal appeal to what's going on that you don't necessarily need specific details for context. And I think that's what Goldman's kind of getting at with some of the jokes in this movie. Like the overall meta of this entire film is that you're never quite given full context for anything.
But it works, yeah.
Sorry, I think I lost you for a while there, but hi, I'm back.
Hey, welcome back.
It's okay.
I
Devin
don't
was
know
just
what
waxing poetical about VHS and the death of VHS.
Yeah, sorry
Um,
about that.
The last thing I remember doing was talking about Waterworld, and then everything cut out.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
then
the
I was-
problem. You're actually not legally allowed to say Waterworld on a podcast in America, or else Kevin Costner comes and destroys your internet connection.
See, but,
That's
Devin's
exactly-
safe,
I mean-
but Devin's safe because of his Faraday setup. So
Yeah, right. Because
Of
I'm
course,
in the
it's in the
dryer,
cage.
so it's all set. He doesn't know about it, but you saying it, especially over in Australia, like which is peopled with criminals. Who knows?
As well we know. Yeah, clearly he got to me. But it's okay. I've said Dances with Wolves 3 times in the mirror, and we're okay.
Oh god.
oh man.
But
So
yeah, so sorry.
yeah,
I mean, you're right.
no,
It is a horrible caricature, but he makes it work because he's Billy Crystal. But
it's
such a
definitely
tenuous line, man. Like Rob
It's definitely
Reiner
problematic.
follows this up with When Harry Met Sally. I just have to say that. Continue.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, the character is like this weird, memorable character being played by Billy Crystal, doing like we said before. Part of it is that it's his shtick, right? Like it's his Billy Crystal like bit that he does. So it's this weird thing where like you don't know how to dissect it. We don't know, we are not equipped here to
No
like
one
rip
here
it
is
apart and
equipped
like
to talk
right
about
like
that.
it's definitely a weird moment to like look back on in 2022 to watch that scene. Like it definitely perks your ears up, right?
I mean, but is it the only one? The fact of like the prince could choose to wed whoever he wanted in the land. Like initially it's just like he can choose anyone as his bride, but then like I almost wondered like some fornication under consent of king if he could have chosen a married woman to be his bride. Like what was the extent of what was meant to be said in that moment by Goldman? And like I joked that like that's not very progressive, but like is really kind of gross to think that just because he's the guy in charge, he can choose whoever he wants as a mate.
Well, I think that that is something about the genre, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a comment on the genre. Whether or not, it's played off well and makes a good point is up to the viewer. But I think that's where that's coming from, is like that's just a comment on just the ways in which these characters these the ways in which we talk about royalty in fantasy stories, we kind of forget like the Game of Thrones of it all. And I think that's where exactly you get stuff like George R. R. Martin, and then eventually coming along and writing something like Game of Thrones and wanting to remind everybody like, no, these guys were bloody bastards. Like they were not like the romantic leads that we've made them up to be in the last like 30 years of fantasy. Like we need to remember that these people were, at the end of the day, horrible. And like so in that weird way, like that kind of stuff works for me, right? Like the prince turning out to be this horrible person, like that whole bit is it all kind of wrapped up in that.
Which,
Yeah, I think it's quite early. You see, although you said he does seem like a good prince. He's tracking them. He's trying to get back the woman that he says he loves and wishes to marry. But he's never the Prince Charming of the story. You never think of him as going to be the great savior who will bring
The
her to
moment
happiness and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, the moment I think of specifically is he says at some point, if we get to her and she's already dead, I'm going to be quite perturbed or something to that effect. Like he's not like I will be heartbroken, I will be stricken, I will be depressed. No, he's just like I will be rather upset if we find her body and it's gone and she's dead. Like and that
Yeah,
right there kind of gives you that kind of hint that maybe he is not all that he's made out to be. But with everything else going on in the movie, you kind of don't know at that point. It's not enough for you to automatically form this opinion like, oh, he's actually the bad guy. It's just enough for you to say like, oh, he's not as charming as we thought. Ha ha ha, rib rib. Like, and then realize like, oh
yeah,
shit, no, he's actually just outright evil. Like that kind of stuff. That works for me because of the story that Goldman is trying to tell and the kind of like the kind of swings he's taking at the genre. All of that stuff makes sense. The choice to turn the weird magical creature in the woods into a Jewish caricature is one that did not have to be made in any fashion.
yeah. I mean, there's
and
some.
yeah, it's interesting to see who made that choice. Whether it was Rob Reiner going, "It'd be funnier if you played it more Jewish," or whether Billy Crystal went, "I've done the character, let's go."
Get kind of the impression that, especially at this time in Billy Crystal's career, he pretty much was off the leash. I mean, and you see that even
Mm.
happen nowadays, where like you get an actor in, especially because if it's for this one scene on this one set, like they're literally showing up for, maybe 2 days worth of work. But honestly, it could have just been he showed up, got into costume, showed up on set for 20 minutes, film, and the whole thing is one shot, and then he walks away. I believe that too, right? But I kind of get the impression that at this point, Billy Crystal is pretty much just doing what Billy Crystal wants to do, right? This is also around the same time where you get to see guys like Al Pacino completely design his character for fucking Dick Tracy and things like that, right? Like
Yeah,
we're in like a decade of time where guys are kind of allowed to get away with anything and everybody's doing coke, so nobody's stopping them, right? Nowadays, guys are still allowed to do whatever they want, but there's at least enough
Well,
sense
there's
around
no
people to
coke
say
on
like
set.
we'll we'll,
Um,
we'll edit that out, right?
yeah. Well,
Mhm.
and especially with like Will pointing out, or maybe it was Sejohn, the trivia of Rob Reiner laughing too hard at what Billy Crystal was doing. It feels like all of the character work was his choice, and from Crystal, and not from Rob Reiner. It's Rob Reiner's idea to cast Billy Crystal in that role, but then what Billy Crystal brings to it. I think Sejohn's right. I think that Billy Crystal someday is going to have to answer. But, or maybe not. Maybe he's under that blanket of Rob Reiner like protection that we also see someone like Jerry Seinfeld under. And we love Jerry Seinfeld. We love the show Seinfeld on this show. I don't deny the fact that like Jerry Seinfeld dated a 17-year-old.
Yeah, I mean,
Like
like
and
it's
Castle Rock
definitely.
protected him. So like
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of this stuff that we have to look at and we have to question about these people that were put up on these kinds of pedestals in the past,
yeah.
for sure, right? And we've learned that tenfold over the last decade. So like it's we've come up against that unfortunate question of like how do we continue to look at this film that, as we've all admitted, like we loved when we were younger and affected our lives in such a way that people around us we know love this movie and quote in this movie. And I know people that had like the marriage story like told at their wedding and shit like that. Like
Yeah.
how do you how do you deal with that and also address the fact that this shit happened in it, and nobody has an answer for that. Like it's just this unfortunate part of the nostalgia game that we're playing, that like, hey, don't forget that this was also made at a time where they didn't understand certain things, and there's shit being made today that 30 years from now they're going to call shit out about, and they should.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I know people like to use that phrase. Oh, it's a product of its time, and you go, it is, and it was. But there's some things that were funny then are still funny now, and some things that were wrong then were still wrong then, and they're definitely wrong now. There wasn't a point where we were like, oh, suddenly today we've all decided this is the bad thing.
Right.
We all kind of knew that wasn't okay. I mean, but still, you get away with it for whatever reason it may be. Like you say, even more so coming into the future, doing the Sammy Davis Jr. stuff, it definitely wasn't okay then.
Yeah.
But it was in that point where it's a hard one, because this film has so many amazing, and those kind of, not to call them movie stealing moments, but that scene is known so well. The marriage speech is known so well. The booing outside the thing, that is such a strong point that even if you don't remember the movie, you've probably seen that scene.
Yeah, yeah.
Or the life sucking machine with Mel Smith as the albino. There are all these bits where people go, these little cameos pop up so nicely.
Yeah.
That you can lose sight of the rest of how amazing the movie is because of that one thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a quote from Andre the Giant saying that the reason he loved doing this movie so much was because no one looked at him weirdly because he was big. Everyone was just nice to him, and they just accepted him as, cool, you're huge, let's do some movie. And it wasn't like, oh, look at this weird huge guy we've got on the set with us.
No, Robin Wright Penn looks like she's having a downright good time with him, especially towards the end of the movie when she jumps out the window into his arms and stuff like that. Like, you totally get that impression. And it's cool to hear that is actually what was going on behind the scenes, because it does look like that kind of movie where that's the other side of it too, right? Is Billy Crystal doing this bit? He's doing it in a room with one of his best friends, Rob Reiner, and like an audience of people that are there and love him. So like, who's going to stop him? And it's what they're all, they're all having fun together, and like sometimes we forget that the shit that we are willing to do and say in private in front of people maybe is not necessarily the best thing to put out there into the world. And then you get into all sorts of shit about like, well, why is it good in private if it's not good in public, that kind of shit. And that's, like I said, this becomes this like weird like rabbit hole of responsibility. And it's not that we shouldn't hold people responsible, but it becomes this kind of question of just like how and who gets to dictate that.
Yeah. I mean, we still all come together and record this knowing very well that the three of us together on microphones could result in the worst thing ever if we become too comfortable.
I mean, there is, with cancel culture nowadays, we can easily say the one thing that between us is just that awesome joke we thought was hilarious, but then actually someone listened to it and you go, hang on a second, that's not okay. But in the heat of the moment or the time of the whatever, you think, like, I went on a rant this morning about pumpkin spice because, living in the Southern Hemisphere, pumpkins aren't in season at the moment.
Right.
And I see constant memes for pumpkin spice, and Starbucks are trying to do one over here, and they're getting pumpkin spice shipped in to do the pumpkin spice latte available in Australia. But like, we're about to enter summer. Pumpkin's not a thing. Halloween is not so much of a thing here.
Right.
But I still have my feed inundated with pumpkin spice memes, and I'm like, this could be maybe my campaign. I'm going to go up against pumpkin spice.
No, if there's a country in this world,
those North Face jacketed people, they'll tear you apart.
But if there's a country in this world that has main character syndrome, it's definitely the United States. So like, you're going to get pumpkin spice and you're going to like it, all right?
Here's what you do, Will.
And I'm going to carve my pumpkin that's like a quarter of the size a pumpkin should be because they were force grown in a lab somewhere. And I'm going to be happy about it.
I'm going to pay $80 for a pumpkin just to kill it. That's all I'm going to do with it. But
won't even eat it or cook it. Just going to chop it up and throw it away.
Yeah, I'm going to tell myself I'm going to carve a face into it, fail halfway through, cut into my hand, get angry, and smash it. That's what's going to happen.
I'm going to cut open the top, I'm going to core it all out, and then I'm going to get bored and fill it with stew.
That's a
candle. There'll be a candle somewhere.
But Will, what you do in your war against pumpkin spice, you sit in the corner and you wait until the reinforcement salted caramel shows up. That stuff is bomb. Salted caramel is way better than pumpkin spice. I'll go on record.
And salted caramel. The good thing about salted caramel is it's a year-round treat.
Year
Like that,
round now, yeah. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
but it
Do you
started.
remember when caramel wasn't salted
I do.
back in the day?
I do.
Well, what it is we've just started putting salt back in everything because what we did is
Because it tastes good.
we grew up in the era of the anti-salt where everybody was trying to get salt out of
Mhm.
everything because we realized that salt was the killer, right? And everybody was like, "Oh shit, this is what's giving
Oh,
everybody heart attacks." So they took it out of everything, and so then they were like, salty can sometimes benefit the flavor and health, actually.
hmm
Surprise, surprise. So like we started putting salt back into everything, but we made a celebration out of it. So we're like,
Yes.
put salt on your chocolate chip cookies, put salt on your caramel, put salt in your chocolate milk. Like there was like we were just so happy about salt again.
I put salt on my salt. Pimp my
Yeah,
salt,
hardcore.
Sejohn.
Well, you need finishing salt that you put on top of your table salt, and then all of that goes on top of some crunchy kosher salt. It's fine.
Well, there's been a string of commercials in Australia recently, which seem to be, I'm not going to say anti-vegan, but they definitely aren't. They're very much like, hey, have you thought about pork recently? Isn't pork amazing? Get some pork
Uh,
on your fork. And the
I like
slogan,
that
get
this
some
is new
pork
to
on your
you.
fork. Oh, it's great.
It's
And then
so
it'll be
cool.
followed instantly by milk's great. Have you had milk?
Oh, man.
And then it'll move on to beef's cool. We like
See,
beef.
the beef commercials have been a thing in America for as long as I've been alive, man.
Well,
The
where's the
celebrate
beef,
like
baby?
American beef. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. And then after that, I bet it's, have you tried putting dairy on your beef? Cheeseburgers,
Oh, yeah,
people.
cheese is good, right? Oh, yeah. There's so many ways, like, why not sit around with the family for a nice plate of meat and a glass of milk? Mm-mm-mm.
That
Support
actually
your
sounds
Australian
terrible,
farmers.
and I love both of those things.
Yep.
Oh
Who doesn't
man.
love
Does
a
not
good
work
milk
as a
steak?
gumbo. I'm going to pour this strawberry milkshake onto my beef. Everything's good now.
Excellent.
But anyway,
Do we have
Man.
anything to talk
got
about
off
the
topic
Princess
again.
Bride? This was a fun little distraction. If anything's gonna get us canceled, it happened in the last 5 minutes of the show.
Yeah.
It's the vegans. They're gonna come for us.
They'll let you know they're coming.
all those girls in yoga pants and North Face jackets, man, I shouldn't have said anything. And yet here I am recalling attention to it.
Yeah,
Led by
those
Kevin
Ugg boots.
Costner. Kevin Costner in his Ugg boots. That's right.
I don't know. I don't want to mess with Kevin Costner. I think that Yellowstone has rubbed off on
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't he now like the governor of Montana or some shit? You don't want to fuck
He's
with
the
that.
Yeah,
he's
see?
the undisputed king of Montana.
He is, and like you won't, and you don't want to say no to him because he just has people in every office that you might need to get stuff done in. And it's good because he doesn't need to have emotion. It's perfect for him.
It's cool because Yellowstone is basically Blue Bloods if they were morally corrupt. I understand why my parents like both shows now.
You know
Yeah.
who I always forget is in The Princess Bride and is always a delight to see again is Christopher Guest. Like
Yes.
I am such a huge Christopher Guest fan. Like I've waxed poetically before about all of his films and various roles and stuff. Especially a couple of months back because I had shown Spinal Tap to the family for the first time. And like seeing him pop up on screen in not a Christopher Guest film, like, is just kind of just this weird like moment of, oh right, he does other things, and then and then just fucking owning this villain role. Like he's amazing in this role. They're gay, right?
Okay, thank you. I've been waiting for the segue and you set it up, but then you just took the shot yourself. I think so. I think they're gay.
That's the joke, right? The joke is that they love each other. And like it's not played off in any type of way that is problematic or upsetting. It's actually rather kind of endearing in a couple of moments.
Oh yeah,
Eh,
it's
I
a beautiful
mean,
relationship.
So
The rest moment.
I almost brought it up when we were talking about things that haven't aged well. The fact that the homosexual couple are the most despicable villains who have no path to redemption in The Princess Bride, that isn't great, is it?
I mean, no, because they're not. It'd be different if they were caricatures of gayness being displayed as the villains of this movie. The fact that they may be is so obscured that it cannot be attributed to the same level of also their like villainy, right? Like it's an interesting aspect that there is definitely this like this homoeroticism between the two of them, and yes, the fact that it is on the villains is definitely something worth questioning at a time when homosexuality is not displayed well in cinema. But in that same vein, it is also not displayed in such a problematic way as it is in other places. So like if they are gay, which we should clarify, this movie does not put its like stamp on that, right? Like it does not say these characters are together in any way. It's just that watching this movie now in 2022, I went, "Oh, there's definitely something going on here." Like the lines that they have with each other, the moments
Tyrone,
that they
you
have.
know I love watching you work, but I have a wedding to plan, a bride to kill.
Yeah. Well, and then the response to that of "remember to get some rest, honey" is essentially what he
Yeah,
says to
exactly.
him.
It is. It's one of those situations, and the fact that Humperdinck is basically getting married just because he has to, and then he's like, "Well, if I have to get married, I kill her, and then I get a war. And when we're at war, nobody is questioning what's going on in our tents." Like the whole reason he wants to go to war with Gilder is to have the beard of war, which
Uh,
yeah, it's is
The,
it
the, to hide the Brokeback Mountain of it all.
yeah.
I will
The cliffs
double
of insanity. No,
I will step back on like my like there is definitely something to be said about the fact that the only homosexual characters on display happen to be these despicable villain characters in this movie. That is definitely something worth questioning for sure. But I will also point out that like they are not being displayed as these like the freaks on the street type
yeah,
of shit that you also see
that you
going
would
on in
also
the
see in the
80s.
movies. Yeah, that's true.
So
Mhm.
any progress should be celebrated, but you know, as we've pointed out already, just because you love a thing does not mean that you can't also like question and tear down the terrible parts of it, right? Like, you know, so yes, they definitely deserve to have a finger wag for the shit that they that they maybe put on display as far as homosexuality goes in this movie, because then there's also some really great like platonic like relationships on display in so many other places. Like I said earlier, like those moments of Robin Wright Penn working with Andre the Giant, they're very, very few where they're
Mhm.
kind of on the same side. But when they're there, like it's fire, right? Like there's definitely those moments. Or the relationship between Inigo and Fezzik, right? Like the that friendship is undeniable in this movie. It's palpable, right? It honestly it kind of is one of the things that locks this movie in is that not only do you have a wonderful on-screen chemistry of Carrie Elwes and Robin Wright at the
Just
time. I
Robin
don't want
Wright,
to keep
yeah.
calling her
Yeah,
Robin
Sean
Robin
Penn
Wright.
Wright,
Yeah.
hadn't
but
ruined her yet.
right, yeah, but in Robin Wright in this movie, like that their relationship is first of all like necessary. Without the two of them being so good together on screen and clearly so good together on screen, like this movie doesn't work. So that is there, and that fires off. But then the second most important relationship in this movie has to be right. It has to be Fezzik and Inigo, and the ways that those two actors click and those two characters click is beautiful to watch because the that kind of friendship is very rarely displayed on screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the way you see Inigo kind of when they're doing the rhymes on the boat and they're just messing around, but it's like he's coaxing him into like not helping him learn new things, but he's like, this is a fun thing we can do together, and I'm going to come and play this game with you because yes, we know it's going to annoy Vicini if we do this, but also it's just something that we fun and do together. It has no
Right.
bearing on the rest of the movie. It doesn't come
Exactly.
back as
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
this is a oh we can now do this again and help ourselves in some way. It's just like this is fun and we'll pass the time, and it's a thing that friends would do anyway because
Yeah.
it's just a game they play.
Yeah. I'm not a huge Rob Reiner nut, right? Like I
Hmm.
think the guy has had some real issues. I never loved like the war he waged on tobacco, specifically the way he went about it and stuff like that. Like I am not a I do love the man's work though.
Is
And I
that at the
think that
planetarium?
I think that he has such this fascinating way of directing where like he has a goal and he aims for it, and the problem is that that goal sometimes kind of gets all over everything, right? So in this movie in particular, he is filming this romantic fantasy, and I think because of that he has a really hard time in scenes that are not necessarily romantic, like not going there. And so, like specifically, there's all of these moments between Inigo and Fezzik that are filmed like they're very close. Physicality is like very
Mm.
close a lot. A lot of people are holding on to each other in this movie. A lot of people are very touchy feely in this movie. And I don't mean this in like a everybody's gay type of way. So like that's the way to read it. Quite the opposite. I don't think the movie intends like any of that. It's just it's hard to not notice that the postures and ways in which like Wes holds Buttercup in this movie, right, is like is very similar to the ways in which Fezzik holds Inigo later when like Inigo is having trouble walking and is inebriated, right? There's these weird parallel moments that I don't think are intended to be read as like everybody loves everybody. I think it's intended I think it's unintended because like Rob Reiner is just in like fantasy romance mode and cannot switch it off for the rest of these other scenes that he's directing.
I mean, that's an interesting read on that. I will say there is a lot of physicality between Fezzik and Inigo in the book. So he could just be borrowing from that, or Goldman could have put it in there. Again, there's nothing inferred or intended regarding their sexuality. They're just like brothers in arms, and they're also lost souls. So, the ability to find somebody else and make them a friend. I mean, one of my favorite notes that I wrote is, even in ancient times, it was impossible for adult males to find friends. Because, look at that discussion between Inigo and Wesley. Spoilers, he's the Dread Pirate Roberts. We haven't really talked a lot about Wesley. But that whole talk where he, just pours his soul out and shares his never-ending quest to find the slaughterer of his father. And, they begin to connect on this real level, and then, but I have to work, right? I need to pay. There's no money in revenge. So, let's fight to the death. And it's really, what you guys want to do is go home, smoke a bowl, and watch The Princezz Bride. That's what you guys want to do, but you're not allowed to do that because, societal norms. And
I think if there was, a physical I think if there's a physical representation of what I'm talking about with Reiner, is it's like they put Vaseline on the lens to film Robin Wright for a couple of scenes and then didn't quite clean it all off when they filmed the rest of this movie, right? It's there happens to just be kind of just this romantic glow throughout the rest of this film. And I think the same can be said about some of his other movies. You talk about A Few Good Men, and we talk about how awkward the scenes in that movie are that are not about the case, because the courtroom drama of it all kind of bleeds into some of that stuff, and it just doesn't feel natural, right? I think it's a problem that Reiner has writ large with his movies, is that for a guy that is tackling, in this movie in particular, this genreless story, he can't help himself but really apply this genre that he clearly loves so much. Because this is also, you made the joke earlier, but this is around the same time that he's doing When Harry Met Sally and things like that. He's in romance mode right now, and he can't seem to help himself.
Yeah, A Few Good Men, I'd love to talk about it because this is the 30th anniversary of that movie, and maybe we'll get there in December, we'll see. But, also, all those scenes outside of the courtroom were all invented for the movie. Because being a stage play, it all just took place in the courtroom. So, there's a reason why they feel a little out of place.
Right. And he struggles to give them a life of their own. I say this loving that movie and adoring this one. So this is getting bronze at the Olympics as far as I'm concerned. The guy still competes, right? I think that they are more than serviceable, these other moments in the movie. It's just that it's hard to not notice that he can't seem to get away from the lovey-doveyness, if I was going to put dumb words on it, right?
If I were going to categorize it, I think about Hook. I really thought about Hook a lot, watching Tyrone and Humperdinck together, and the fact that Dustin Hoffman and Mario, why the fuck can't I think of his name? Bob Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins.
Yeah, that they have gone on record as saying, we decided to play the characters as if they were two old queens who had been married, and they're just this old couple. I don't think that conversation necessarily took place between Chris Sarandon and Christopher Guest. I just, it doesn't seem like a thing we're gonna be gay secretly in this movie, the same way that Hook and Smee are. I think it's just a way that, maybe they were told to read lines and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it has to do with Reiner's direction and in the moment decisions being made, that he can't help himself as this kind of, he's a dude that loves love, and I can't knock him for that, really, in the end.
It almost feels like one of those, when you're going through character work in scenes and you go, okay, we're going to play this scene angry, then we'll play it happy, then we'll play it sad, then we'll play it whatever. Yeah. It's as if he's gone, okay, play it as if you guys work together, and there's a very clear, hierarchy between the two of you. Now let's play it as if you're best friends. Now let's play it as if you're lovers. And they've just gone through this kind of process, and it's got to the point they've gone, this one works the best. It
No,
doesn't need to be explicitly said,
yeah,
hey,
yeah,
we're together. But if you guys know that undertone's there, it changes how you read the lines.
right. Yeah, and you get to do that in a movie, right? Like you get to rework the same scene 3 times and then pick which one you want to put in, unlike say stage work, where like you need to make that decision in rehearsal and then own it.
Yeah.
Not that that makes film any easier or anything like that. That's just a comment on how things are made. I want to make sure I get that out there. Well, and I think the only time that this really kind of hits me kind of the worst way is unfortunately the very last moment of this movie, right? Where the grandfather turns around and says "as you wish" to the young child, which is very sweet, like on the page. This idea being like, oh, he's saying "I love you," and it's the thing that we've learned this whole time means "I love you." It's a thimble, right? Like it's the Peter Pan of it all. But this idea that every other time the movie it's been said has been this very romantic moment. It just kind of hits the wrong way. And I think it is because of this choice of Reiner's to like really play up just the romance between everybody in this movie. And again, I don't think it's a conscious choice. I think it is just he cannot help himself with the ways in which he films. And there are just moments where sometimes that choice can come across as like head scratching.
I mean, yeah, even the bickering between Miracle Max and Valerie has like kind of a cute thing about it. And also like not a great lesson in this movie that like true love is born from mutual abuse. Cuz like basically she abused Wesley as her superior until he made her realize that she loves him. And then like when he's got her captured as the Dread Pirate Roberts persona, he's like getting his revenge. For the time she's like, polish my saddle, farm boy.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into some real like 1980s stand-up comedy stuff, right? Of like, fuck my wife, right? And it's just like, yeah, and it's like everybody's like, well, you're supposed to love the person you're with for the rest of your life. You guys know that, right? Right? Like it really leads into some of that really problematic comedy that we loved so much back then.
And there are moments where you see, like, he obviously when he comes back as the Dread Pirate Roberts and she somehow doesn't recognize him, and you get this wonderful line that when he's fighting with Fezzik and he says, "Why'd you wear a mask?" He's like, "Oh, they're actually very comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing them in the future." Listening to that now after a pandemic is a very different line than it was.
Bride called COVID. Maybe that's what Fred Savage is sick with.
Yeah, this was the first. He was patient zero. And it came up, and I was like, "Oh, that hits way differently than it did years ago." But then when he's with her, and they have the whole fight, and they do the arcane powder with Vizzini, and he's back and forth on that bit, and then she says something, and he raises his hand like he's going to slap her across the face, and then says, "My hand will not fly alone anymore." And it's like that's a real aggressive moment from somebody that is pretending. I guess he's pretending at that time to be a persona, but at that point, they're alone. He could just go, "By the way, it's me, Wesley."
Yeah, no,
there's no need to still be the pirate.
The trickery, the trickery is like why is this still going on? Was definitely a question I asked myself a couple of times.
It's like he's testing her to make sure that she's still in love with him, because clearly, first of all, Wesley has murdered people, right? Under the guise of the Dread Pirate Roberts. He's been the Dread Pirate Roberts for 2 years. Based
and even before that,
right,
and even before that, he was a first hand, right? So he was still a pirate.
Yeah, exactly.
He was still learning to be the Dread Pirate Roberts. You can't do that by not killing people,
right?
Yeah, because it's about the name. And if the Dread Pirate Roberts is out there like working at soup kitchens, nobody's going to be afraid of him. So Wesley has definitely taken innocent life in the pursuit of money. That's just the fact.
It's really funny because I actually had this exact kind of crisis watching Our Flag Means Death, right? And and the ways in which that show, I adore the heck out of it, but the way that it kind of bends over backwards to try and really forgive a lot of like the really kind of
piracy of
shit,
piracy,
right? Right, and like in some ways with Our Flag Means Death, I'm gonna leave it at that is what that show is attempting to do, right? Is doing that kind of reevaluation of piracy, all wrapped up in this beautiful Taika Waititi like comedy like sitcom-y stuff that he does. That's great. And in the ways in which that show succeeds and doesn't succeed is a discussion for another day. But I could not help but think about that exact kind of conversation when talking about him being the Dread Pirate Roberts, and like, did he murder people, or are we supposed to believe that he just at every moment had like a convenient excuse to like look the other way when somebody else did it or something, right? It's like that episode of American Dad where you find out Stan's never killed anybody.
The 42-year-old virgin. Classic. All right.
Yeah, you kind of do have that bit where he is in this, in the persona, and the fact he chooses not to kill Inigo after the fight, where he's like, well, I'd hate to kill such a wonderful man, so he just knocks him out and runs away. You go, and the same with Fezzik, he just chokes him till he passes out and then leaves him. There's no, that side of malice isn't there. He's obviously very good at fighting and very good at what he does, but he doesn't have that, oh, well, I'll just kill this person for the sake of killing them and then carry on with my life. He does obviously have the good side, but obviously you're saying he wouldn't have become the Dread Pirate Roberts.
He has to have been the Dread Pirate Roberts for 2 years by the time what happens in this movie happens, because he talks about
and then for three, and then spent 3 years before that as a valet for the other one, right?
For Ryan.
Yeah,
my name is Ryan.
And Cumberbund. What was the other one?
Cumberbund. Yeah. And he was not the real Dread Pirate Roberts either. But also, what I will say about his sparing of Inigo and Fezzik in those moments, they both make it very clear that they are goons. They are hired help, and that Vicini is the actual evil in this whole plot. So, like, the fact that he's willing to listen and understand, I mean, you also need to think about the fact that when you're the Dread Pirate Roberts, a constant thought in your mind has to be your retirement, right? Because you know that someday you're going to get tired of this life and you're going to have to find the next Dread Pirate Roberts. So like, and that's exactly how it works. He talks to Inigo and he hears that Inigo is very good at the revenge business, but also he's not finding like any joy or contentment. It's not sparking joy in him anymore. But once he's done with killing Count Rugen, and he's like, I'm not sure what to do now, it's like a pretty easy conversation to be like, you could be the next Dread Pirate Roberts. And the only reason he knows that is because he took the time to listen to his adversary, which is the same way that the Dread Pirate Ryan was able to find Wesley to take over the mantle. And I imagine like that's just how it works. So it makes no sense to kill Inigo or Fezzik in those moments because he knows that there's bigger game out there. And the bigger game is Vicini, and he wastes no fucking time in killing that guy.
Oh yeah, straight away. I've got my. I've spent the last few years building up an immunity to arcane powder.
How could you do that? I know how
you're
I know how you're supposed to build up an immunity to poison. I've read about that. Like, I've always kind of been about it, but like iocane powder is described as this like hyper deadly poison. I would imagine 1 grain would kill you.
Oh yeah, and it's odorless and tasteless and dissolves instantly into liquid.
Yeah, but the question has to become, right, is at any point, any of this stuff, right, the bad and the good, everything that we're talking about, is it in service of this larger kind of bit of the satire, and does it work? And it definitely does, right? Because like specifically the thing that's setting this off for me is that joke about the iocane and building up this, and you're supposed to believe it's so deadly, but of course he's built this up. But you're okay with that because it's a convention of the genre, and it's a convention of the genre that's ridiculous, and it's being played as ridiculous. So like the movie is right there with you when you say that, when you ask those questions, like how did you do this? The movie also wants to know. The movie is just right there, like, yeah, I know how, right? And it's just like,
so that's a really good question, but we got to go to the fire swamp because it's the next set piece. No, but
yeah, that's a really good question. Do you want 300 pages describing how he got used to it? No, I don't really want that. No, nobody does. Let's move on. Yeah, the movie is right there with you that whole time, and not every movie can succeed in doing that. Yeah, some people would find that irritating and pretentious, depending on who is acting that way. Because we've all had that friend at the bar, right, who's telling you that story that is too good to be true, and you're just like, how is any of this? And they're just like, I don't know, right? And you're just like, fuck you, it didn't happen then. Like,
it's usually me. But
yeah.
yeah, it is usually enough. But they happened. I swear.
It's the opposite of that. The character in movies where you've got four guys sat around some big screen where they're like, but if that arrow gets to this number, then the whole place will explode. You go, everyone there knows that. That's their job. They should know that. But the audience doesn't, so you have to
Right.
say it for us.
Right.
Whereas with this, they're
Convention
like,
of
no,
the genre, yeah.
I build up a immunity to arcane powder and carry on. Everything's fine. It's like it doesn't need. You don't have to go back and go because I spent every day tasting a bit more or doing whatever. It's just accepted that he's the Dread Pirate Roberts. He can do anything.
Well,
Therefore, he must have built up this immunity.
And his ability to bounce back from like illness and sickness and poisons and all that stuff is actually like plot significant eventually later, right? Like the idea being that he has the joke where he's like, I've always been a fast healer, right? Is like kind of par for the course because we know what he was able to do with the arcane powder, right? Like it builds this kind of lore about him that pays off later. That's the other part is it's not all for naught, right? Like it comes back.
When Marvel introduces mutants to the MCU, it's all going to come back to Inigo, Fezzik, and Wesley, and they were the first three mutants.
Okay.
I mean, it's on Disney Plus. Was it on Star for you, Will, or was it on Disney Plus, The Princess Bride? How did you watch it?
Netflix.
Well, that's crazy because it's on Disney Plus here. And you talk about Willow, Sejohn, and like after The Princess Bride, they're like, you know what you might like and you should check out now is Willow. And I'm like,
makes sense.
Well, yeah of course is Willow, because like this is the same kind of movie. It's not as good. It's got some great stuff in it. I love Warwick Davis, but it's no Princess Bride. I have to do one thing with this movie. Will, if I'm allowed to take the reins for a second.
Please, I'm just handing them over. You can't see, but I've handed them over.
Thank you. I appreciate it. In our very special episodes, our actual very special episodes, we've been talking about the movies that made us. And clearly, I don't think anyone here on the show right now would disagree if I were to say, one of the only reasons that the three of us are together is because of The Princess Bride, right? I think like it was kind of the secret handshake that strengthened the bonds between the three of us. Am I crazy saying that?
I feel like it's more of like a symptom than it is necessarily the disease, but the things that make us love Princess Bride are definitely things that make us love each other. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that's a very nice way. I mean, in the Rob Reiner lovey-dovey of it all. That's a lovely way to put it.
Okay, well that's
the new no homo is in a Rob Reiner.
In a Rob Reiner circa 1987 sort of way. There's the cancel moment, guys. As Sejohn said, no homo.
Yeah, we did it. We found it.
We found it. But what I will talk about is for the 25th anniversary. No, the 20th. I'm trying to do the math in my head. The 20th anniversary, 2007, when this movie came back in because a 20th anniversary DVD came out, and that's when we finally got it at Hollywood Video. This movie was a movie at Hollywood Video that me and Jay Bro would watch every Tuesday when we worked together. This was the first movie we would put on, is The Princess Bride.
Nice.
And it feels so appropriate to like just acknowledge it in the same year of all these other movies from 2007, because this movie, with the celebration of its 20th anniversary, became a big part of my 2007. And how I was gauging everything. And the second movie we would watch is a movie that I promise you we're going to talk about in November on the Say Report in a very special episode. But that was every Tuesday. We'd put on The Princess Bride, and then we'd put on this other film to be revealed later on. And I'm brought right back there because, I mean, Sejohn was definitely there, and then Will came along like a year later. So it all kind of works and fits together for me. Will, I thank you eternally for being like, we have to do a Princess Bride episode. And Sejohn, thank you for agreeing to let Will take the reins for this episode. Is there anything else about The Princess Bride that you guys want to talk about before I introduce? We're going to do one sort of Say Reporty thing that's not related to The Princess Bride at the end of it. I wish it were a quiz, but it's something else.
Oh, it's something else. I'm excited.
Oh, it's something
no,
else.
the only other thing I'll say is like I think if anything, like I I hope that everybody understands how much we are celebrating this film today. Like, we're not just paying it lip service and all of that. I think we've made it very clear how much this movie means to us, despite a lot of the stuff that we did rip apart in it. But this idea being that I do think it is a movie about love, right? Like from tip to toe, it is and it runs the gamut. It runs the whole spectrum of sexualities that are available and out there, and the ways in which people can be platonically friends, and more so in other areas, and sometimes a little bit gay, and sometimes extremely straight in some other moments. And there's just this movie. I think it's why it persists, is because of that exact idea, that it is a movie about love in all forms. Even familial, in the ways in which you see the grandfather and the son, and the grandson, and the ways that relationship evolves. Like, for a framing device, the story of the two of them is just as endearing as any other relationship in this movie, right? I It is a movie about love, and who isn't going to want to sit down and live in that world for 2 hours?
Yeah, it's a nice thing to come back to. Like, it's that kind of comfortable blanket where you go, I know every single beat and moment of this movie, and like you said, you might still every now and then pick up a new thing and be like, oh, hang on a second, I didn't realize that was like the beat of not seeing the ROUSs before, but knowing they're there, kind of thing. You do see those moments, but also you're like, it's so easy to have on that I don't have to worry about the next bit, or if I do happen to go and grab something from another room, I come back in. I don't need to rewind and know. I know exactly what happened in that moment I was gone for. I'm probably quoting it in my head while I walk away to get what I need because I know it so nice, so well.
Yeah,
I
you
also
ever do
wanted
that
to
with a
share.
song where you're like singing
Yeah,
along and you have to walk away for a second, you come back and you're on beat with exactly where the
yeah,
song was, and you're like, fuck yeah. Yeah, you could definitely do that with this movie, right?
I mean, we can
yeah.
definitely do that with this movie. Doesn't necessarily mean everybody can, but I think of the films that we've talked about on the show and that are in the pantheon of cinema, it's definitely one of those ones where if you're familiar with it, you know it.
Yeah, and I think you'll see, and you said, as I said before, you'll get that point where you'll make a reference to something. It might be an "as you wish," or it could be some little thing, and there'll be a couple of faces in the room where you're just like, "Yeah, someone's there with me. It wasn't just me being weird. There is that universal kind of connection and love for the movie among people who know it." And there'll be someone who's like, "Oh, I don't know that bit. What's that?" And you go, "Just go home and watch Princess Bride. You'll understand why everyone else just had a good time. And I'm sorry you weren't involved, but you can be soon because just go watch it."
Don't worry, you'll get it next time.
I
Yeah,
mean,
don't worry. I'll make a different reference because it's bound to come up again because it easily does.
it was
I do
super.
want to share
Oops, sorry.
two of my favorite bits of trivia that I read about this movie. Firstly, that apparently during scenes it would become very cold for Robin Wright, so Andre the Giant used to put his hand over her head, and his hand was so big it covered her whole head like a hat, and would keep her warm during filming.
I noticed
It's
that
just,
when he
just
picked her
brilliant.
out of the eels. I'm like, his hand is bigger than her head. He's a
Yeah.
Yeah,
giant.
he would put his hand over her head like a hat, and she would it would help warm her up on set.
Lose a
It is
lot of
almost
heat from the
comical,
head.
that
Yeah.
moment when he puts the sleeper move on her,
Yeah,
because you
because
can tell how delicate he's trying to be in that moment, but it is still frightening because his hand is just fucking huge around the back of
he
her neck.
is. Well, that's the other one. I mean, not my favorite. One bit I did read was Liam Neeson auditioned to be Fezzik when it first came through, and was laughed off because he's only 6'4", and they were like, "No, you're
Only
not big enough." Yeah, Rob Reiner apparently was like, "Nah, you're only 6'4". It's not enough,
Only
and
six
sent him
foot
away.
four for the three shortest guys in the room podcasting right now.
Yeah, I was like, "Wow, that is he's got some space." But no, my other second favorite bit of trivia was the rodents of unusual size were actually people inside rat suits,
Oh, I mean, right, it
which
had
is
to be with
brilliant.
the ways that some of
Oh,
them are moving.
the way they move and the way they do stuff. There's no animatronics in those days.
And
Fight
credit
And
where
scene.
credit's
That
due.
fight scene is still one of my favorite.
So
Oh
good.
my God. Sorry,
well, yeah,
finish
this
your
is the
bit. I did just
the
remember one more
bit
thing though.
so that fight scene with it almost didn't happen because Danny Blackner, who is the actor inside the rat suit for that moment, had been pulled over for speeding the night before and was in jail because he'd been drinking and then was caught speeding. And the police didn't believe that he was going to work to be a rat the next day, so they wouldn't let him out of jail.
I mean, don't drink and drive, folks, but that's a good anecdote. And the other
Yeah, of all the
ROUS
reasons why you're late.
performer, Anthony Georgiou. So Danny Blackner and Anthony Giorgio, thank you for being the Rodents of Unusual Size.
Oh man.
Yes.
So that whole swamp scene I think is just like a treasure trove of just amazing filmmaking in ways we don't do it anymore, right? Like the set is gorgeous, that whole bit with the ROUSs at those guys in suits and stuff like that. We just don't do that anymore, right? And the thing that I to this day don't even know how they pulled it off, and I don't think they would ever do it whatever way they did it now, is that moment when the character of Wes, I don't know if it's actually Carrie Elwes or not, dives head first into that sand. It is a
Yeah,
full
he grabs a
on
vine
like,
and dives.
and it is a full on dive. Like
Yeah.
he just like hands in front, like just jumps in, and it is definitely real sand. So it is like it is this physical thing that happens in front of your very eyes, and I do not know how they pull it off. And then like the bit of it taking like 2 or 3 minutes for it to happen, the ROUS comes by and all of that, wonderful, wonderful bit. But I was this time I was just like mouth agape at like that dive that I had watched happen, and I have no idea how they did it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I don't want to know. I'm just in my mind. He dived into some quicksand and pulled her out. It was fine.
No, it is one of the most magical bits of movie making still to me.
Yeah. For me,
And I think,
sorry, no, go.
no, you do your things because I want to finish on one point, so we will finish on that.
Excellent, point. And you're the leader. So the scene where Wesley stands up after the pain speech, which is perfection. I love the idea of putting someone to the pain, wallowing in freakish misery for the rest of your days. Great speech. That first time that you see him stand up, for me, it was awe-inspiring. And I have to imagine that everybody feels that same way. Because his ability to stand up in that moment is completely a mystery. You don't know.
It is in question, for sure.
Yeah.
And then immediately, like, I was right. You did not have the strength to do it. So that's it. And I will posit that the sword fight between Inigo and Wesley on the Cliffs of Insanity is 3 of the best moments of footage ever put to film. I love that. To the fact that when it happened, in my notebook, I wrote, no notes for the next 3 minutes. Like, I'm just putting it aside and I'm enjoying it. Because it's that beautiful.
Because it was a 1 minute scene they'd prepared, and Rob Reiner went, no, it should be longer because it's amazing. So they went away and made it 3 minutes. And like the amount, and the fact it's not quick cut. It's not like a Matrix style 2 moves, cut, do it again, do this way. There are good 20-30 seconds of sword
fencing.
fighting.
Yeah.
And actual fencing where they trained for months to get that right. And he said the only bit they don't do is the flip when Wesley jumps down and lands not at all near his sword, but then is right next to his sword.
Yeah.
That's the only bit that wasn't the 2 main actors, and you go, that's awesome for them to go on. We'll put in the hours and commitment and time because we want to do this. And it's become one of those epic duel scenes.
That metal bar
and
that
the
has
character work is like bar none. Like the 2 of them together on screen is magic. Like I said, everybody just works. Like the chemistry between everybody in this movie is so palpable. It's awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Well, once you can tell when the actors had fun making it, this is definitely that movie where like no one felt this was like going to work.
Right.
They wanted to be there all the time and doing this because look how much fun it is.
Look how much fun it is talking about it. I'm having a blast.
Well, yeah, here we are.
Yeah. All right, Will. So what's your last bit? And then we have something a little bit more say report to finish this one off.
My final bit is just, huge props to the one and only Martin Knopfler for writing a whole soundtrack. And the music fits so nicely with this movie. And I mean, you guys know my connection to Mark. He's a lovely guy. And I think it's just awesome that they went, we'll just have one person do this, and it can just be a nice flowing theme from one musician. And Storybook Story is just a great.
But he didn't write or perform that song, which is crazy to me. Like, I've always thought that was part of the Mark Knopfler of it all, but that is a different dude who writes and performs Storybook Story.
I'd say it's the movie making thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to bring it up until you brought it up, but I thank you for bringing it up right at the end, Will.
It felt like a good place to kind of round up to, because it does, it really ties the movie together, just like the rug in Big Lebowski.
I mean, well, this is for us, and I'm sorry to the listeners. Sejohn, you know Will's connection to Mark, right?
I mean, tangentially, I think I've picked up on it over the years, but I mean, I would not say that I know specifics.
So no, I spent my fourth year of college. So after being in the US with you guys, I then went back to my actual university in England. It was in Oxford, but it wasn't that one. Um, and I moved in with a couple of friends, and they were like, "Oh, this other guy Joe's going to move in with us." I was like, "Yeah, so cool. I don't know Joe, but I'm sure he's a nice guy. If you guys pick him, I'll trust you." And it turned out to be Joe Knopfler, son of Mark Knopfler. That's not a very it's a pretty uncommon name, so I put two and two together pretty quickly. And I lived with Joe for the year, and he was like, "Oh, do you fancy going and seeing Dad play?" I was like, "Obviously, I want to go and see your dad play. That's it's not even shouldn't really be a question." And we ended up going to the Royal Albert Hall to watch Mark Knopfler support Bob Dylan. And I was like, of all the things in a box where they bring you, sushi and beer, I was like, this is a very different lifestyle than I am used to, but I'm having a nice time. And Bob Dylan wasn't great because he was at the point where he didn't have a clue what was going on, and he was kind of a bar of music behind the rest of the band. But Knopfler was great.
Nice.
And then we went round. He had two slip discs at the time, so actually the whole show from an office chair. So he span round to talk to the band, and then would spin back around with his guitar on, and that's how he played the show. And was in a wheelchair every time he wasn't on stage because he couldn't walk.
Oh man!
And it's like, but the fact he still put on one of the best shows I've ever seen in that moment on whatever. Just an amazing human. And to be fair, his son Joe is a really nice guy, and we're still in touch.
Nice.
See, so sometimes it's not me telling the story. I'm like, yeah, bullshit, Will. Yeah, bullshit. Also, at this moment, I feel a little bad putting you on the spot, Sejohn. Do you have a Bob Dylan story?
I mean, other than the fact that I got dragged to a Bob Dylan show long before I really could have appreciated where I was at, and it's one of my most haunting memories that I really did not respect what I was doing at the time.
Mine is roadieing for him my sophomore year and throwing up on Cooperstown Field, one of the most famous fields in baseball. I like that we all have a Bob Dylan story. Maybe that's why we're
got our
friends.
Dylan moment. Oh, very different as well.
Yeah. No, we talked earlier about being in a shitty place in your life when you're a teenage kid and you just want to reject everything that people are telling you should embrace. And definitely one of those moments where I was like, I want to be at Boy Scouts, but I'm here at a Bob Dylan concert for old people music.
Oof, tangled up in blue there, Sejohn. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, like I said, I really regret my attitude that night. It is one of my most haunting dreams.
Well, I'm sorry. We'll work through it sometime. All right. So I think maybe there'll be a little bit more Princezz Bride afterwards, but here's a Say Report thing that we have to. We're recording this one a little bit earlier. It's kind of a time capsule sort of episode, so that's not a big deal. But today, this very day that we're recording, Nintendo and Illumination released the first trailer for the Super Mario Brothers movie starring Chris Pratt as Super Mario. So we're going to go away real quick, and we suggest that you, the listener, do the same to watch the trailer and then come back and give a quick, no longer than 5 minutes reaction to that trailer. So we will see you on the other side of Super Mario Brothers. And we're back! We're going to get sued by 92 Pro FM because I literally just used a soundbite from them on the Giovanni and Kim show. Local references, local work. All right, guys, I got the timer. I'm going to throw 5 minutes on it. What'd you think of that trailer?
So I'm curious to hear what you think because you were so ready to talk about Chris Pratt as Mario, which we get one line of. The bigger thing is all of the Jack Black we get as Bowser.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I wasn't ready. I hadn't seen the trailer, CJ.
I understand. So I'm curious what you think now about how the focus was on Bowser and not on Mario, and whether or not you think that was a tactful decision or not. Or I guess tacticful is what I really mean. Do you think they did it on purpose? That's really what I'm trying to say.
Yes, of course. I think they did it on purpose.
It's better to go with the words we all know than making up your own new ones.
Hey, I have a podcast. I can do what I want.
If autocorrect doesn't recognize the word, just use a different one.
That's how I do it. I write synopsis now.
I am so the initial reaction that is going around online that I am perplexed by because I watched this trailer much earlier today when it first came out, and I've just been kind of sitting in the soup, as it were, trying to figure out where people were on it, and I've decided I'm just going to ignore the world on this one because I mean, I'm excited. The trailer actually, honestly, just looks gorgeous. Like I am very, very like into the style and all that shit that's going on. But people are just like losing their shit about Chris Pratt, and like, I mean, in the meanest ways. Like they're just like, oh, he just sounds so stupid. I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. There's like one line from him in the whole thing, and it's said like not to camera. Like just like I can't. It's the wildest. It's the wildest reaction, gut reaction to that trailer. But I am very, very, I'm very into it.
Will, since you're the guest.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, I will echo that comment of how well made it looks. Like we're not going to have the Sonic problem of it all being wrong. They seem to have kept real close to the source material. The star looked right. The Toad comes popping up, and you go, "That's perfect." There's all these little bits where the look of the style and it didn't feel like initially like a family friendly movie. It got more towards it, but I was like, initially, I was like, this seems like it's going to cause some upsets to some small children who might love Mario in their own way, but aren't ready for this.
I don't know. I mean, we say that all the time, but I feel like kids can always be trusted with darker material. People get like I say this because some Mario games recently in the last like few decades, the Mario games they have put out, some of them have gotten pretty buck wild. The thing that
Yeah.
I was thinking of the whole time with all of the Bowserness of it all is Bowser's Fury, the add-on that they put on 3D World when they put it out on Switch earlier last year. Was that only last year? Or was it?
That
But
was last year, yeah.
yeah, but like I don't know if you guys partook of it. I think Dev, you did, and I think we talked about it a lot. But like the ending of that is like a kaiju Bowser that you battle in the sky, and it is some scary shit. Like the sky gets dark and like and then lightning strikes and all of this shit. Like it is it was some dark stuff, right? And I say that, but like the Paper Mario games have gotten really dark in their time, and like literally universe ending. Characters have died in Mario games in the last few years. Like it's been really wild to watch what they've been willing to do with that character. So I am actually really excited that they're not going to hold any punches when it comes to making Bowser, scary.
Yeah, I mean, when he blows the fire and destroys that ice castle, I was terrified at that moment. I also wondered why the Penguins didn't bring that big guy from after I get all 120 stars in Super Mario 64. Like, he might be their only hope.
We don't know the rest of that scene.
That's
He
true.
very could
That's
easily be
true.
the next moment. Is that one crashing?
That's a good point. But I guess I'm gonna see it. It's not like I wasn't gonna see it. And imagine how people felt when they saw the 1993 Super Mario Brothers trailer, and it
Yeah.
was nothing like the game.
Yeah.
But if I had to put a bow on it, what I'm going to announce right here is for March 2023, we're going to cover the old Super Mario Brothers movie as our very special episode. It'll be the 30th anniversary of that, and a week before this new movie comes out. So that's what I was really thinking, is just I'm excited to get to revisit the old one with Bob Hoskins and Luigi there, John Leguizamo. But this one,
don't show off that you know his name now.
Yeah, that's what I did. I also looked that up while we watched the trailer, so I could feel all notice. He was in that movie Unleashed with Jet Li. No, I mean, it looked good. It really did look good. The Mario of it looked good, but I also think it was very smart of them to give Chris Pratt kind of one line. To the fact that some of these people are like, oh, Mario didn't even talk in the trailer, is one of the responses I saw when it first came out. So,
yeah.
All right.
We'll see. We'll see what the world is willing to do with it. But like I said, I'm pretty much going to just go my own way with it. Thank you.
Yep. I mean, I'm going to check it out, and then we're going to explore the old one. Anything else from you, Will, on that one, or let's wrap this one up? No. What?
It's not at me. It's just in general.
Oh no, the internet's running out in Australia. We gotta wrap this up now.
We gotta wrap it up now.
Oh, there he goes.
All right. So the last thing I want to say about The Princess Bride is I don't think it's a movie that could ever be remade, except for the way that Quibi did it in their essentially everybody celebrated The Princess Bride. Because it is a movie that is worth celebrating. And Will, I thank you so much for bringing it to us as a topic, and for also stepping into the shoes of like main host driving force behind this episode. On the one hand, because you did a great job, but also I think now you'll see how heavy the hat is, or the headphones, as it were. to do the show.
I mean, all those moments when you guys don't fulfill a promise, I understand. I get it.
All right, Princess Buttercup.
As you wish.
Yay.
All right. So, if you would like to, well, I guess, yeah, Will, is there anything that you want to plug before we do our thing? Again, you're the guest.
I just feel it's somehow we've got through the whole episode without anybody saying you killed my father, prepare to die. And that should have been one of the first things we said. So I will plug that quote.
That's very
That's all
good.
I'd like to plug. If anyone would like to send me that quote via Twitter, you can do it, Fournier09, and I will enjoy your tweeting of quotes at me.
Excellent. That's right. Ruin Will's life with memes of Inigo Montoya, Fournier09 on Twitter. Will, this is sort of the big thing. This is our 299th episode. Next week, that means that it's our 300th episode. Is there any way we could coax you to come back for that one?
Oh, I feel there might be something in the works that would be a good idea for that. I've had some ideas. I've got some inklings. Things are brewing.
Because we don't have any fucking clue what we're doing for 300.
No idea what we're doing with the 300th episode. Basically, we're going to hand you the reins again for it. So you passed the audition. No. Don't ruin the surprise yet. Don't ruin the surprise yet.
I don't want to do a whole episode just me.
No.
I mean, I can monologue with the best of them, but not for your special day.
It won't be a dev talk. I promise you that. No, we just let you to step by, celebrate it. I mean, you're a big part of the show, and if I realized you were just over in the corner waiting for our call, you'd be on more episodes. So if you got nothing going on next week, you're just sitting in the corner in the dryer. We'd love to have you.
I mean, I always have to go to work at some point, but not too strictly. If I get my work done early in the week, maybe I'll be okay.
Excellent. So that's it. So Will's going to be here for episode 300, everybody. That's exciting. If you have some ideas, because as Sejohn said, we clearly have none, why don't you send them to Sejohn at Siege versus the World?
And if you want to send... I was trying to think of something dumb to point your way. But send all of the Super Mario news you can get your hands on to Devon at Devon D. Decker.
Right, because after 300, then we're going to have to deal with all the Super Mario that's going on in the world. All right, well, usually I throw to Will, so I'm going to throw to Will so Will can throw to Will to send this one home. So, Will?
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. And in the words of the film, if you're going to make me throw to myself, as you wish.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.